just as a rich man wouldn't compare wealth with a beggar. In the current situation, this young temple knight, if you don't count the enhancement from divine arts, would absolutely not surpass the upper limit of a veteran knight in terms of strength. To be honest, that level of strength was already becoming negligible in Rionnee's eyes. Rionnee moved to the rear of the giant axe evil spirit knight and struck it with a giant hammer strike, of course, without activating overdrive. Heavy strike, Rionnee swung the hammer, its tip piercing through the knight's protective dark aura and directly hitting the black armor. Clang, the grating sound of metal clashing echoed all around. Just one hit. The giant axe evil spirit knight stumbled from Rionnee's blow. Its black armor pierced with several small holes from the concentrated spikes on the hammer's head. Rionnee was elated. The penetrating power of the hammer's spiked head was truly remarkable. Keep in mind that this was without activating any skills or transcendent traits, and yet it had such destructive force, if he did activate them. The young temple knight, seeing that Rionnee, without a word, tacitly coordinated with him to attack the giant axe evil spirit from behind, couldn't help feeling a bit of competitiveness which felt like punching into a cotton pile. However, the young temple knight didn't waste the opportunity Rionnee created and followed up with 2 consecutive stabs and a shield strike at the giant axe evil spirit. The continuous assault pinned down the giant axe evil spirit's attention, allowing Rionnee the leeway to exercise the toggle hammer technique and inflict sustained damage from the side and rear. This gave Rionnee the pleasurable sensation of hammering at a wooden pile, farming experience points. Delightful, but the good times didn't last long. Just as the 2 evil spirit knights were being suppressed and victory seemed within reach, suddenly, the trees in the dense forest shook and an evil spirit knight wielding a flail burst out. What the hell? Damn, now there's a 3rd evil spirit knight. Everyone was shocked at the sight that unfolded before them. Wasn't there supposed to be only 1 evil spirit knight? Laguerre was also taken aback with her beautiful eyes wide open in a dumbfounded daze. The newly appeared flail-wielding evil spirit knight swung its weapon high, and in a single strike, sent a law enforcer from County Town flying through the air like a torn sack. His chest caved in and vomiting blood, clearly not long for this world. The flail was unlike ordinary ones, featuring a chain with 3 spiked iron balls, each the size of a melon, and immense destructive power. At this moment, Headmaster Rudolph's eyes twitched violently. Damn it, 3 evil spirit knights. It seemed he had no choice but to use that item. Rudolph swiftly reached into his robe, intending to pull something out. But in the next second his eyes widened in shock, his mouth gaping, and the motion of pulling something out abruptly stopped. The giant axe evil spirit knight suddenly fell off the funeral horse, and even the horse itself, struck by the massive impact force, nearly knelt on its front hooves. Rudolph saw clearly. A hole the size of an infant's head had appeared in the back of the black armor worn by the giant axe evil spirit knight. The one who struck was, of course, Rionnee. The sudden appearance of the flail-wielding evil spirit knight didn't faze the young temple knight. But the scene that just unfolded had him utterly astounded. At the moment, his face under the knight helmet was nearly catatonic, mouth agape, but thankfully, his helmet hid his expression from everyone else. God, Rionnee was this strong without the blessing and protection of the goddess, if there was such a blessing. The young temple knight didn't dare to continue that thought. No wonder Rionnee, so young, could earn such high praise and overtures from Headmaster Rudolph. Such strength and talent were truly formidable. Looking at it now, the only one in the county town church who might be able to firmly outclass Rionnee would probably be the current divine child. No, it's hard to say, perhaps only a one-on-one contest would tell. Meanwhile, Rionnee's strike, after activating overdrive and huge strength, instantly extinguished any competitive thoughts the young temple knight might have harbored. Sometimes that's just how people are. If the difference with someone else is not too great, or if it's just a small gap, most will feel they can catch up or even surpass them with their own efforts. But once that gap becomes substantial enough, most will completely lose the will to compete. You take on that flail-wielding evil spirit knight. I'll finish up with this giant axe evil spirit knight and then come over to help you. Rionnee's deep voice resounded. Now, with that flail-wielding evil spirit rampaging among those with ordinary fighting strength, Rionnee naturally couldn't just stand by and watch. After all, they were his night watchman subordinates. Oh yes, yes, Lord Rionnee. The young temple knight momentarily paused, but then he quickly nodded in agreement and turned his horse to charge at the newly emerged flail-wielding Evil Spirit Knight. And the giant axe Evil Spirit Knight, who had suffered a heavy blow, let out a furious roar. Following that, he raised the giant axe in his hand high with one hand, seemingly about to unleash some sort of devastating move. Rain leaped up from his warhorse and struck the giant axe Evil Spirit Knight with a secret skill, the Earth-Splitting Hammer, because the force of Rain kicking off was too great, and through the transmission of force through the stirrups, his warhorse instantly collapsed on the ground. It couldn't be helped. As Rain's strength increased, ordinary warhorses were becoming increasingly unable to keep up with his power. The giant axe Evil Spirit Knight saw Rain's formidable approach and immediately swung the 1.5-meter long metal axe handle, horizontally trying to block Rain's strike. Clang! Rain's secret skill, Earth-Splitting Hammer, used the flat head of the warhammer. When it struck the giant axe, it nearly bent the metal handle into a bow shape. Although the material of the axe handle was extraordinary and could withstand Rain's mighty, earth-splitting hammer, the entire body of the giant axe Evil Spirit Knight was sent flying into the soft forest ground due to Rain's overwhelming strength. The giant axe Evil Spirit Knight now had everything below his waist, helplessly trapped in the earth. Seeing this scene, Rudolph had been reaching into his chest to retrieve something, but he stopped. After carefully observing the battle between Rain and the giant axe Evil Spirit Knight, Rudolph withdrew his hand from his chest. It seemed that there was no need to use his trump card yet. This Rain had given me another surprise. Is his combat power really this strong? He truly is an excellent candidate for a future punishment knight. No, I must try again later. Such talent can't be missed by the church, Rudolph thought to himself. As Rudolph pondered, the battle between Rain and the giant axe Evil Spirit Knight was reaching its conclusion. Rain used Earth-Splitting Hammer to plant the giant axe Evil Spirit like a tree in the ground, and taking advantage of his opponent's inability to recover, twisted his waist and hips in a motion akin to throwing a hammer throw, swinging the warhammer high. This time, he aimed the pointed end at the enemy, sweeping up from the ground. It was the Tokkul Hammer technique's secret skill, Rising Dragon Hammer. Boom! A sound akin to a watermelon being smashed by a stick abruptly resounded. The giant axe Evil Spirit Knight went from half-buried in the earth to rocketing into the air, suddenly taking flight, bringing with him a trail of dirt. Rain's Rising Dragon Hammer had struck his opponent's chin, sinking the pointed end deep beneath the edge of the faceplate, hence the sound of shattering. Boom! The giant axe Evil Spirit Knight, after fluttering in the air for a few seconds, crashed heavily to the ground, letting out a piercing scream. The next second, the swirling black mist that had been protecting him suddenly burst forth. Then his towering body, as if hollowed out, collapsed, and his full set of black armor scattered all over the ground. System prompt appeared. Your Tokkul Hammer technique skill has improved. Experience plus 243. You have experienced a battle. Knight, Transcendent, experience plus 81. Congratulations. Your Knight, Transcendent profession level has ascended. Originally, Rain's Knight, Transcendent profession level was already at LV3, 476/500, so this successful level up brought him up to LV4, 57/1000. At the same time, Rain also received 1 skill point and 1 attribute point as level up rewards. At that moment, Rain, with sharp eyes, noticed a black crystal the size of a thumb in the remains of the giant axe Evil Spirit. It immediately reminded him of the blood-red crystal that had once offered him a large number of experience points. Oh, he picked it up as if by accident. Sure enough, the system prompt sounded. Ding! Host detected to have obtained a demonic energy crystal, triggering profession change Evil Spirit Knight. Prerequisites for changing profession to Evil Spirit Knight are 1. Official Knight. 2. Spirit 15 points or above. Current conditions met. Yes/no to change profession to Evil Spirit Knight. This was entirely unexpected. Rain's expression immediately turned into that of an elderly man staring at his phone. JPG. The system is getting more and more absurd. Rain muttered to himself. Evil Spirit Knight, such a thing doesn't look like it's meant for normal people at all. Maybe skip the prompt for this kind of profession change next time. Without hesitation, he chose no. Then a second system prompt sounded. Ding. Unknown absorbable energy detected. Yes/no to absorb. Note. After absorption, it can be converted to designated professional experience points. This is more like it. This is the right way to use a demonic energy crystal, just absorb it. Feeling elated, Rain quickly chose yes. The next second, the weird black energy within the demonic crystal, like a surging tide, rushed through Rain's arm, heading deeper into his body. Just as before, it seemed like the system selectively absorbed the crystal's energy, and again, Rain felt no discomfort whatsoever. Moreover, the entire absorption and conversion process was completed almost instantly. Ding! A total of 433 Transcendent Experience points converted. Please select Knight, Transcendent, /Wizard Apprentice, Transcendent, /Beast Tamer, Transcendent for the increase. Seeing this, Rain pondered for a moment, and then decided to add points to Beast Tamer, Transcendent. The reason was quite simple. His current Beast Tamer, Transcendent, profession level was LV1, 12/100, and choosing to add points to Beast Tamer would allow him to directly ascend 2 levels. If the remaining options of Knight or Wizard Apprentice were chosen, neither would be able to level up. Obviously, having an extra 2 attribute points and 2 skill points would be much more attractive. Thus, Rain silently chanted in his mind, Beast Tamer. In an instant, 2 consecutive system prompts appeared. Congratulations, your Beast Tamer Transcendent profession level has increased. Congratulations, your Beast Tamer Transcendent profession level has increased. Seeing the Beast Tamer Transcendent level jump from LV1 to LV3, 12/500, on the panel, Rain couldn't help but reveal a brilliant smile. He continued to read on. At the bottom of the panel, it showed remaining attribute points. 3 and remaining skill points, 4. Among these, 1 skill point was left unallocated from the last level up. 1 battle had brought him 3 attribute points and 3 skill points. Rain felt that his journey to the Nightingale Forest was indeed the right decision. Seeming to think of something, Rain suddenly looked up at the chained evil spirit in the next second. His eyes were filled with fervor. Next, due to the absence of a 4th evil spirit knight, the subsequent battles had no suspense. After Rain killed the chained evil spirit knight, the riding spear evil spirit knight was also slain by the combined efforts of the 3 temple knights. This time, Rain obtained a 2nd crystal of evil energy. By interpreting the solemn expressions of Rudolph and the other temple knights as they gazed at the crystal, Rain knew he probably wouldn't be able to absorb it on the spot. Rain, this kind of crystal containing massive amounts of evil energy will attract many evil forces. I suggest it would be better to leave it to our church to handle, said Rudolph, the presiding bishop, as he stepped forward to speak to Rain. If it were anything else, Rain might have agreed. But now this object meant experience candy to Rain, and naturally there was no way he would hand it over to Rudolph. In fact, Rain was even considering if there was any way to trade for the riding spear, evil spirit knight's crystal. Bishop Rudolph, I would like to study it a bit. Please rest assured that if I can't handle it, I will contact the church immediately. Thank you for your concern, Rain tactfully refused. Rudolph thought for a moment, apparently recalling Rain's explosive strength, and convinced that Rain had the ability to deal with any evil forces that might be drawn in. He nodded and agreed. Well then, please make sure to keep it safe. After the battle ended, they counted the losses. Fortunately, 2 members of Flashgold Town's night watchmen were severely injured, but miraculously none were killed. In contrast, of the 4 temple knights, 1 was seriously injured, 1 slightly injured, with only 2 retaining their combat strength. All these encounters with 3 evil spirit knights, each not weaker than a peak knight, took place even before they had entered the temple ruins. Therefore, as everyone gazed at the temple within reach, the mysterious and dilapidated temple seemed like a beast with its gaping maw open, waiting for them to unsuspectingly walk into. At that moment, Matteo came forward with a worried look and reported, "Lieutenant, do we need to go in here?" Well, Rain rubbed his chin, turning his head to look at Bishop Rudolph. Rudolph touched the scroll in his chest, pondered for a moment, and then spoke. Since we've come this far, it's still best that we investigate further to understand what exactly is hidden in this temple. This time, I've also brought a high-level divine arts scroll bestowed by the Archbishop. I believe a safe retreat for us should still be no problem. Rain's eyebrows rose. A high-level divine arts scroll. He had just seen Bishop Rudolph use 2 divine arts, which indeed, in combination with the Temple Knights, could produce tremendous power. If there was a higher-level divine arts scroll, the dangers of the subsequent temple exploration should be relatively controllable, mainly because the evil spirit knight monsters alone had provided him with an exceptionally generous experience pill reward. It was difficult not to have Rain anticipate whether there could be similarly bountiful, or even more generous experience treasures within the temple. Of course, the most important reason he dared to enter the unknown temple to explore was based on Rain Carlin's rapidly increasing personal strength. Rain glanced at his panel. Name, Rain Carlin. Occupation: Wizard Apprentice, Transcendent LV4, 132/1000/Knight, Transcendent LV4, 57/1000/Beast Tamer, Transcendent LV3, 12/500/Blacksmith LV4, 329/1000 Constitution, 18 Strength, 16 Agility, 16 Spirit. 20 remaining attribute points, 3 remaining skill points, 4. Looking at the last 3 and 4 in the attributes column, Rain couldn't help but think of a saying: with grain in the house, there is no panic. Furthermore, as Rain's spiritual power broke through 20 points, both the activity level and sensitivity of his spiritual power had greatly improved. Therefore, although Rain could feel that there was some kind of danger lurking inside the dilapidated temple, he could also vaguely sense that this danger seemed not potent enough to be completely unstoppable for him. After weighing the potential dangers and opportunities in his mind, Rain nodded and said, "I have no objections, but, Headmaster Rudolph, I suggest that the night watchmen and the security officers don't need to enter either. Let them be responsible for the surveillance outside. How about that?" Headmaster Rudolph gave a slight smile, nodded, and said, "Of course, that's possible." Hearing this, many night watchmen sighed in relief. After all, having just witnessed the combat strength of the evil spirit knights, they already knew that this mysterious event involved monsters whose fighting prowess even the temple knights would struggle to handle, let alone these ordinary people, who really couldn't be of much help. "Rain, I want to go too. I haven't found my brother's other battle axe yet." Lagare walked up to Rain, her beautiful eyes looking up at him with great anticipation. "Well, it might be very dangerous inside. I will keep an eye out for your brother's weapon, but my advice is that it would be safer for you to stay outside." Rain understood Lagare's urgent feelings, but he was more hesitant due to the dangers inside the temple. "I'm not afraid of danger. Besides, I will take good care of myself." Lagare raised her blood-veined steel shield as she spoke. "All right then, but stay close to me, and if anything goes wrong, we'll retreat immediately." Seeing her determination, Rain knew he couldn't persuade Lagare otherwise, so he nodded reluctantly, agreeing to her idea of entering together. Eventually, Rudolph and Rain discussed and decided to have the severely injured temple knight and all the night watchmen and the security officers stay outside the temple. So Rudolph, Rain, Lagare, and 3 temple knights, a total of 6 people, entered the temple to explore. After a brief rest and preparation, the group of 6 slowly entered the ruined temple garden. What once must have been a beautiful garden now, after countless periods of exposure to the sun and lack of maintenance, showed its gray-white granite walls almost entirely collapsed. The walls were covered with various climbing plants such as ivy, roses, and creeper, looking lush, and possessed a weighty sense of having stood the test of time. Inside the garden, instead of the delicate cultivated flowers, various wild weeds and bushes now thrived, with the occasional tall trees growing lush and strong. From the outside, if it weren't for the still visible, collapsed granite walls, one would never guess this place had once been a man-made garden. "Rain, look," Lagare pointed at the ground. As she had been keeping an eye on the ground and corners for any weapons left by her brother and their squad members, Lagare was the first to spot some kind of dragging trace on the ground. As soon as Lagare spoke, everyone's gaze focused on the ground where her finger pointed. "This is the trace of something heavy being dragged." One of the temple knights squatted down, examining it closely. "Not just something heavy, there are also sporadic blood stains on the surface of the soil. These must be traces of dragging a body." Rain, keenly observant, also took a close look and added, "Within this bird and beast-absent temple ruins, it seemed the only ones capable of dragging bodies were the 3 evil spirit knights." Rain thought to himself. Beforehand, he had thought that the evil spirit knights just attacked and killed invaders within this area. Apparently, they also collected and dragged the bodies of the killed enemies into the temple. This just got interesting. Collecting flesh and blood, huh? It seemed eerily similar to the blood sacrifice rituals of the Black Flame Church. "There's more here." Another temple knight leading the way pointed out another new dragging trace. Everyone hurried forward to examine it again. Indeed, this trace was more pronounced. Could it be that the evil spirit knights are collecting human remains for some evil ritual? The lightly injured temple knight speculated after pondering. No, it's not necessarily just human remains. This drag mark is much wider. It seems like it was caused by dragging the body of a beast. Look, there are hairs in the soil, and these thick, long hairs are unlikely to be human. Rain picked up a black hair sticking stiffly with soil, feeling its hardness. Since his spiritual strength continued to grow, Rain's level of perception had also risen. With his current perceptiveness, he could easily notice some details that were previously easy to overlook, which brought him a fair bit of joy. Rain is right, this fur, if I'm not mistaken. Should be from a ferocious wild boar's bristles. Rudolph nodded and said. At the same time, he greatly appreciated Rain's detailed observational skills. Careful and sensitive observation is also a manifestation of strength. Gathering flesh or collecting carcasses, it seems there might be an altar inside, but it's unknown whether the sacrificial ritual has been successfully conducted. Moreover, everyone be alert and careful, Rudolph said solemnly, reminding everyone. The group nodded, gripped their weapons tighter, and continued forward. After passing through a garden overgrown with weeds and dense vines, what appeared before them was a building similar to the ancient Greek Parthenon temple from Rain's previous life. However, this temple seemed to have partially collapsed due to its age, much like the garden walls. Various vine plants had enveloped it, making the entire exterior resemble a lush green hill. The exterior of the temple had more than a dozen tall Doric-style columns, most of which still stood majestically, seemingly silently narrating past splendor and authority. This style of temple, I seem to have seen it somewhere. Archpriest Rudolph murmured softly, his face showing a thoughtful expression. Meanwhile, Rain looked around and noticed that the drag marks on the ground were becoming more concentrated. It seemed the drag marks converging from all directions, similar to dragging bodies. All ended at the dilapidated temple hall in front of them. Especially at the entrance of the temple hall, where the drag marks overlapped many times, they had formed traces that were obviously large and slightly indented, much like creeks joining into a river. After thinking for a moment, Rain walked over to a temple exterior wall obscured by vines and carefully inspected it. Generally speaking, if it were a temple, there should be some designs on the exterior wall, Rain thought to himself. Usually these designs are used to record the deities worshipped, their great deeds, or grand battle scenes, for deities need faith and worship, and murals are one of the effective ways to propagate this. Soon, Rain discovered something. Under the cover of vines, there were quite a few line-shaped patterns on the exterior wall. SSSH. After Rain tore off a large handful of vines, a very peculiar pattern was revealed before his eyes. The pattern, drawn with simple lines, was most notably dominated by an exceptionally tall tree. The figures of little people beneath it, in stark contrast, were dwarfed by its height, differing by tens or even hundreds of times. Obviously, this represented a colossal tree, emphasizing its towering and majestic size. Additionally, there were countless tiny figures depicted as worshipping and praying under the tree, their actions humble. At this moment, others also heard Rain tearing the vines and immediately walked over. Is this a tree?" a young temple knight said, quite amazed. "Right," came the voice of Archpriest Rudolph from behind. "I think I might have guessed the origin of this temple. This is the distinctive pattern of the Mother Tree sect. The Mother Tree sect was active a long time ago, recorded in ancient texts thousands of years ago, said to have existed since the distant barbaric ages. However, about 2,000 years ago, at the beginning of the empire, it was branded as a cult and eradicated. Although it said some scattered followers continued spreading it, it has essentially been extinct for many years." Rudolph briefly introduced the Mother Tree sect. Moreover, their main doctrine preached that life originated from a strange mother tree from the void, which brought vigorous vitality to the world, hence everyone must revere and worship the Mother Tree. Listening to this, it seems this Mother Tree sect doesn't seem that wrong, Rain asked, stroking his chin. The exact reasons for its eradication I can't remember clearly, but it seems to be due to overly bloody sacrificial rituals and the seeking of complete autonomy. Those were probably the reasons leading to its eradication by the Empire. Rudolph thought for a moment and responded. "I see," Rain nodded. In his view, the bloody sacrificial rituals were probably not the focus. The focus was the latter's seeking of autonomy. If the Empire's strength was substantial, it would absolutely not permit autonomy. This would be no different from seceding and becoming an independent nation. So it seems, This must be a site of a temple from the Mother Tree sect. No wonder the helmets of these evil spirit knights all have a crown-like design on top. It seems this style of helmet must be a form of homage to the Mother Tree, Rain thought aloud. Exactly, Rudolph nodded. People are always particularly fearful of the unknown. Once everyone learned that this was a temple site of the Mother Tree sect from thousands of years ago, they seemed much more relaxed. No longer as tense as before. Soon the group followed the drag marks toward the temple hall. "Oh, this is my brother Harold's battle axe." Laguerre quickly walked up to the temple's partially collapsed door and exclaimed softly. Rain followed Laguerre's gaze, and sure enough, another Moonblade battle axe had been abandoned there. From the traces on the ground and the location of the axe, it was likely that Harold, when he was dragged here, had not been fully dead, and so had still been tightly gripping his battle axe. Thinking of this, Laguerre, with brother Harold's battle axe in hand, looked towards the temple hall with a glitter in her eyes, seemingly harboring a glimmer of hope and anticipation. "Be careful, I can feel the evil aura growing stronger ahead. It's right in the temple hall," the Bishop Rudolph warned solemnly as he stared at the hall in front of them. "Yes, Bishop." 3 temple knights with sword and shield led the way, while Rudolph, Rain, and Laguerre followed closely behind, the 6 of them entering the dimly lit hall gradually. As they stepped into the hall, everyone's pupils shrank. It was mainly because the scene in front of them was too bloody, too shocking. They saw a dense flesh forest before them, including humans, ogres, gnolls, and other sapient creatures, as well as some other beasts, which were exceptionally large and seemed to have been fierce predators in life. But now, these once powerful beings were skewered like kebabs on the thick, sharp branches. At first glance, these corpses seemed to be merely that, corpses, but as everyone approached, goosebumps instantly formed. It turned out that the heads or upper bodies of these sapient beings and beasts was still mostly intact, but the flesh of their lower halves had bizarrely merged with the tree trunks, forming a spiral structure resembling the Tianjin twisted donut Rain had seen in his previous life. Only, the flesh-twisted donut in front of them was half gray bark and half vivid red flesh, intertwined in a chaotic spiral, fused together into one. This scene, in the dim hall under the patchy light and shadow, evoked an indescribable feeling of disgust, horror, and eeriness. "This is the remains of my brother." Laguerre's eyes reddened as she pointed to a thick trunk with human remains twisted around it. "It looks like this is a rudimentary altar, apparently set for some kind of sacrificial ritual," a temple knight said grimly. "It's probably not that simple," Rain said as he observed the scene, feeling there was more than met the eye than just a sacrificial procedure. Moreover, he now had a clear understanding of the bloody sacrificial ritual Rudolph had mentioned about the Mother Tree sect. Just as Laguerre and several temple knights were about to step forward for a closer look, suddenly, a rustling sound came from behind the group, reminiscent of the sound of a multitude of snakes slithering across the ground. Simultaneously, as the sound emerged, the already dim temple hall became even darker. Everyone immediately turned to look and saw that the half-collapsed doorway they had entered through was now covered with thick, writhing vines like living snakes. Clang! A temple knight quickly drew his longsword, intending to chop through the vines, when suddenly, everyone turned again to face the center of the temple hall's flesh forest. All felt a heart-palpitating sensation as a vast and indistinct aura seemed to awaken rapidly. The next second, the dense flesh forest started to tremble, the flesh coiled around the branches shivering. Rain's core danger perception LV3 skill began to frantically warn him. Rain narrowed his eyes and immediately pulled Laguerre, who was in front of him, back. Before he could say anything, there was a loud boom as the ground burst open, and a gargantuan monster leapt out from the earth. Thud! Hiss! Laguerre's eyes widened dramatically, her mouth partly open as she gasped in shock. What kind of monster was this? The group then realized that the flesh forest was not a forest at all, but the roots of this massive monster. Yes, it was the roots. What appeared to be a forest was actually an upside-down growth, with the body of the flesh forest hidden underground while the roots sprawled above, mingling in strange twists with the various corpses dragged by the evil spirit knights. The enormous monster seemed to be using the energy-rich, transcendent, ferocious corpses as nourishment. But Rain had a feeling that the corpses were not simply nourishment, they seemed to be integrated into the creature's body. The overly dark environment was definitely not conducive for the group's battle, as most people did not possess Rain's dark vision ability. Therefore, As Bishop Rudolph waved his right hand, a divine art similar to a flare lit up in front of the monster. In an instant, everyone could clearly see the monster's true form. The creature's body was a massive stump about 2 to 3 meters in diameter and 7 to 8 meters long, with roots of varying thickness growing densely around it, mingling with flesh. These roots, different in shape and size, meandered for over 10 meters, making it a creature nearly 20 meters in length. This was the first time Rain had encountered a monster of such immense size. Moreover, he noticed that even the roots without entwined corpses were covered in skin resembling red biological muscle and fascia, aside from the gray bark. It seemed as though these roots had just finished digesting the corpses. The red flesh fascia appeared to still be active, constantly pulsating and expanding as if they were a heart, and oozing red fluid. This creature, neither plant-like nor animal-like in appearance, made one's scalp tingle unpleasantly. With the surge of air, Rain instantly smelled the pungent odor of blood and rot. He couldn't tell whether the stench came from the red flesh or the roots themselves. "Flesh tree spirit," Headmaster Rudolph suddenly exclaimed as something dawned on him. Having learned from the murals that they were in the ruins of a temple related to the Mother Tree cult, Rudolph's first sight of this monster triggered a connection, and soon he recalled its origin. This is the flesh tree spirit mentioned in the books, a guardian used by the Mother Tree cult to protect their highest deity. It is said to be dormant most of the time, requiring the sacrifice of a large number of transcendent beings to awaken it. "I didn't expect to see a flesh tree spirit guarding this place." Rudolph spoke quickly. "If there's a flesh tree spirit here, could it be that this place has something to do with the Mother Tree?" Boom! An unexpected attack interrupted Rudolph's explanation. Dozens of intertwined roots, forming a massive collective, suddenly smashed towards them, prompting the group to quickly roll away to avoid it. Nobody, including Rain, intended to attempt a frontal confrontation to test the opponent's strength. Given the enormous size of the creature, weighing tens of tons, it was just not on the same level as a human. It would be as foolish for a strongman among humans to attempt to wrestle an elephant, and the flesh tree spirit before them was 10 times the size of an elephant. Moreover, its gigantic size did not hinder its agility. Its movements were as brisk as a monkey's. Faced with this behemoth, meters long and too large for several people to wrap their arms around, Rain, although wielding immense power, was momentarily unsure of how to proceed. After a moment's thought, Rain quickly switched weapons, replacing his war hammer with the glimmering greatsword. Clearly, against a monster with so many roots, it was essential to do some pruning before even thinking about reaching its main body. That moment, the flesh tree spirit, having missed with its strike, began to transform. 2 of the thickest roots lifted its massive upper body erect like arms, and hundreds of roots at its tail entwined to form a snake-like appendage. The top of the tree stump suddenly split open into a gaping maw, meters wide, resembling a giant creature with a split jaw. In the next second, like a crocodile, the creature made an incredibly swift rush and death roll towards the injured knight, who was slightly slower to react. Boom! The knight, unable to dodge in time, was shockingly swallowed whole by the gaping maw into the body of the flesh tree spirit. The entire process was so fast, the young knight didn't even have time to scream before he vanished from the world. This filled Rudolph with a mix of shock and rage. He did not hesitate to pull out a high-level divine art scroll from his bosom and tore it open. Divine Art's Sword of Judgment. As Rudolph's angry shout echoed, a pale blue longsword, 5 meters long and emanating violent energy waves, suddenly appeared before him, pointing straight ahead. The appearance of the energy blade was abrupt, manifesting out of nowhere, and in less than a blink, the pale blue greatsword struck at the flesh tree spirit like lightning. The flesh tree spirit, still seemingly savoring its feast, had no time to react or to dodge due to its huge size. Pachai, the main body of the flesh tree spirit, the tree stump, was instantly pierced through by the pale blue energy longsword, leaving a hole the size of a washbasin, clean through. Seeing the immense power of the divine arts cast by Headmaster Rudolph, the other 2 knights who had just been immersed in the shock and sorrow of losing a comrade couldn't help but feel an unexpected surge of joy. The very next second, a fierce roar echoed through the temple hall. Roar, the bloodthirsty tree spirit, which had just devoured a knight, was now howling in agony, its massive body writhing and tumbling in excruciating pain. Rain looked on with astonishment at the divine art that had just been unleashed. Indeed, the church's foundation was strong, and the attack of the pale blue glimmering greatsword was incredibly fast and powerful. Even he wasn't sure if he could have avoided that strike, if he couldn't have dodged it. The current plight of the bloodthirsty tree spirit was the best testament to the power of the divine arts. However, Rain's keen perception noticed that although the bloodthirsty tree spirit couldn't withstand the attack of the Sword of Judgment, it miraculously survived the hit, severely injured but not dead. No, it was not just surviving, its wounds were gradually healing. Many of its smaller roots withered and snapped off, falling to the ground and quickly turning to deadwood, while the flesh that had been entwined around the roots instantly turned to rot. This process seemed to draw life and energy from its roots, rapidly mending the tree spirit's bodily injuries. Although the wound still contained a lot of the pale blue longsword's energy, as more and more roots perished, a strange energy was being produced in large quantities, causing the pale blue energy on the wound to be rapidly neutralized by this strange energy. One could see that on the tree spirit's body. The wound the size of a basin was visibly closing at a remarkable speed. With dark vision enhanced, Rain, even in the dim hall, could clearly see numerous root-like tendrils, as thick as fingers, growing from the inner walls of the tree spirit's wound, quickly repairing it. But this scene went unnoticed by the others because the magic similar to light technique had faded. The two knights who were closest to the bloodthirsty tree spirit, seeing its roots falling to the ground and turning into deadwood, believed that the powerful divine art just cast must have vanquished the tree spirit. All that was left was to wait for the bloodthirsty tree spirit to slowly perish amidst its howls of pain. Rain immediately cried out a warning, "Be careful, the bloodthirsty tree spirit isn't dead. It's regenerating quickly, attack now, continue the attack." The two knights turned to Rain with puzzled looks. Wasn't the creature continuously howling in agony, and hadn't a large number of its roots already broken off and fallen? How could it not be dead 1 minute earlier? As Rudolph tore open the high-level divine art scroll Sword of Judgment, such strong energy fluctuations. Similarly, in the Nightingale Forest, the black-haired elf girl stopped in her tracks. The direction she looked up to was exactly where Rain's team was located, in the ruined temple. This kind of energy fluctuation, there's another energy this seems to be. After pondering for a moment, the elf's eyes widened in surprise. After a brief deliberation, she immediately adjusted her direction and quickly advanced towards the direction of the ruined temple, seemingly feeling that this still wasn't fast enough. The next second, her tall figure suddenly disappeared from the spot, transforming into an eagle that swiftly took to the skies, flapping wings and flying at a great speed. In the dilapidated hall of the Mother Tree Faith's temple, since Riani's combat prowess was evident to all when he had slain the evil spirit knight. Earlier, even though the two temple knights did not quite believe what Riani had said, they also did not openly question him. It was only their stunned body language that seemed to say, "Even though Lord Rain, you're very strong, don't talk nonsense." At the same time, Rudolph, the head of the church, also held some doubts about Rain's warning. After all, the scroll he had just torn open contained the high-level divine art, Sword of Judgment. Others might not be aware of the power of this divine art, but as a professional member of the church, he was all too aware of its might. Once it hit, it not only caused a gigantic piercing injury in an instant to the enemy, but also the surging energy swirling around the Sword of Judgment would linger, inflicting continuous damage to the wound. Put simply, if not killed by the initial strike, the enemy would die from the continuous loss of blood. But the next second, Rudolph's mouth was agape with horror. The words of warning had only reached his throat when it was already too late. The two temple knights were struck by the flesh forest's tail, which lashed out like a giant python, sending them flying through the air like golf balls. With a snap, both were knocked more than 10 meters into the air. In midair, the sound of bones breaking and tendons snapping could still be heard. Riani sighed deeply in his heart. Alas, a winning situation had been forcefully turned into a losing one. Furthermore, those two were probably not dead but crippled, no longer to be counted on. After all that, in the end, he was left alone in this melee, a lone warrior in close combat. As for Lagare, not having stepped into the transcendent realm, she probably found even dealing with the flesh forest's roots difficult. Divine art, holy force levitation. Divine art, radiant healing. Rudolph, with a book in hand, directed two life-saving divine arts towards the Midair Temple Knights with utmost speed. Rudolph cast 2 successive divine arts, exhausting the last of his spiritual power. Although the high-level divine art, Sword of Judgment, was immensely powerful. It had drained a great deal of Rudolph's spiritual power. Even as a head of the church, he was struggling to endure. With the help of holy force levitation, the two temple knights floated down to the ground as lightly as feathers. Rudolph and Laguerre hurried forward to assess the knight's injuries. Unfortunately, the weaker of the two temple knights had already been beyond saving in midair. His organs and bones crushed to a pulp by the flesh forest's blow. The other, stronger temple knight had just barely survived, and with the aid of the divine art Radiant Healing, was desperately trying to heal his ravaged organs, but he was completely incapacitated for the moment. So, within a matter of seconds, the tide had turned. Rudolph and Laguerre raised their heads to look at Rieni, who was not far to their side. It seemed that Rain was the only one left who could interfere with the flesh forest. Faced with the gradually healing flesh forest, Rain knew he could not wait any longer. He had to take the initiative to attack. After all, while the flesh forest was still heavily wounded at the moment, he had to inflict sustained and sufficient damage. Only in this way could he possibly interrupt its self-healing and subsequently find a vulnerability and kill it. Limit break. Rain, brandishing the glimmering greatsword, charged headlong towards the flesh forest's wildly flying roots without a second thought. Swish, swish, swish. Upon engaging, Rain found that the flesh forest was indeed very strong, no, super strong. He realized that even in its injured state, its root attacks were heavy and forceful, and the variously sized flesh roots were incredibly tough. Each slash Rain made felt like cutting into a rubber tire, very difficult to sever. Thankfully, his glimmering greatsword had been forged with star metal and glowstone, or else even his limit break might not have been enough to cut through these roots. One could imagine that if the flesh forest had not been hurt, and was in its prime state, the number of roots as well as their offensive and defensive power would likely ascend to another level. If that were the case, Rain would have faced much more difficulty than he was facing now. Confronting such a formidable enemy, Rain activated his limit break right away, boosting all three of his attributes by more than 60%. His agility, in particular, increased substantially from 16 points to 26 points, naturally leading to a drastic increase in his movement speed. It was this incredible speed that allowed Rain to remain unyielding amidst the perilous battle conditions. At this moment, the battle scene in the Great Hall was Rain moving quickly without a pause, each step an act of slicing or dodging, in response to the hundreds of flesh roots encircling him. The roots varied in size and speed, with a multitude of attack methods. Some stabbed with sharp tips, some swept across, and others lashed downwards. The diversity was endless. Luckily, Rain's giant bear sword technique had already reached level 6. Ever since reaching level 6, Rain had felt that his giant bear sword technique had entered a new major realm. According to Hamilton, that was the mastery level. So, depending on the breakthrough and mastery level swordsmanship, Rain barely managed to cope with the overwhelming offensive of the flesh roots. However, Rain soon realized that his current level of swordsmanship still wasn't strong enough, unable to purely rely on swordsmanship to block many of the root attacks, forcing him to dodge at high speed. This led to a very critical problem. That is, Rain's current physical strength was being consumed extremely fast. Based on the current rate of exhaustion, Rain estimated that he could only maintain the breakthrough state for about a minute, and even with those 3 remaining attribute points, it would be like a drop in the bucket, not lasting very long. After a moment's thought, Rain quickly made a decision. He immediately added a skill point to the Giant Bear Sword technique. The panel showed Giant Bear Sword technique LV6, 345/3000, Right Arrow Giant Bear Sword technique LV7, 345/5000. In an instant, fragmented training segments of the Giant Bear Sword technique began to pour into Rain's mind and synchronously implanted into his muscle memory. To Rain, it felt as though he had undergone years of arduous practice with the Giant Bear Sword technique. At this point, Rain gained a deeper understanding of the Giant Bear Sword technique. Although it was still at the mastery level, it had significantly improved. At that moment, a majestic eagle flew over the ruined temple. Its sharp eyes first showed a human-like surprise at the temple below. The next moment, it seemed to hear the fierce fighting sounds and energy fluctuations coming from within the temple. With a dive, it arrived at the top of the temple, quietly peering inside through the crevices of the collapsed structure. The eagle that arrived was naturally the black-haired elf. Soon, with her dark vision talent, she was able to make out the battle situation inside the hall. Indeed. It's a flesh tree spirit. Those corrupted ones from the Mother Tree cult have resurfaced, haven't they? If Rain were beside her, he would definitely be able to discern from the black-haired elf's unfriendly tone that she had no fondness for the Mother Tree cult. Where are the people from the church? There was definitely a strong divine power fluctuation just now, which seems to be the aura of the gods of monsoon and ocean. After a thorough search with her keen eagle eyes, the black-haired elf finally spotted Rudolph and the others in a dim corner of the hall. Oh, they seem to be injured. I thought I was going to enjoy a good show. The black-haired elf seemed hesitant about whether to join the battle. It was not for any other reason, but because she had no fondness for the people of the church either. The various churches of mankind all considered her druids to be heretics, so they did their utmost to avoid appearing before church personnel. Forget it. When this young knight can no longer hold on, I'll help them out. After weighing the options with a frown, the black-haired elf murmured, at this moment. Inside the dim temple hall, Rain, who had improved his swordsmanship, wielded the giant bear sword technique with each move incredibly swift and fluid, creating the impression of watching a waltz of strength and beauty at quadruple speed. Thanks to the exercise, special effect of the glimmering greatsword, as well as the increase in sword speed following the breakthrough. The glimmering greatsword in Rain's hands now resembled a laser greatsword. Thus, a radiant orb of light made up of high-speed dancing blades dashed left and right, speeding up and slowing down, and wherever it passed, the various sized flesh roots were severed and fell. Even after being chopped off, these wildly flailing roots didn't lose their vitality immediately. They continued to twist and bend, both in the air and on the ground. Occasionally, the flesh tree spirit would command a huge root the diameter of a wash basin to strike at Rain, and at that moment, the white glowing blade orb would immediately dodge. After the upgrade to LV7, Rain's giant bear sword technique allowed him to endure much longer than the minute he was originally capable of, extending to at least 2 minutes or even longer. The scene left Rudolph, Lagare, and the remaining temple knight dumbstruck. Although they had witnessed Rain's fight against the evil spirit knight and knew that Rain was highly skilled with both hammer and sword, they hadn't expected him to be this powerful. It was as if he were fighting the flesh tree spirit alone, a single man turning the tide, a single man reversing the situation. However, Rudolph's brow soon furrowed. This way, it won't work. Because before the multitude of roots from the flesh tree spirit can be cut down, Rain's physical strength will likely be exhausted first. Right, he's now initiated the breakthrough, but hesitates to use his transcendent abilities, probably because he's worried about draining his strength too soon and falling out of the breakthrough state. And once his speed slows down, Rain is done for. Human bodies can't withstand attacks from such massive roots. The equally injured temple knight beside him also saw the issue, looking even more troubled. In the eyes of both Rudolph and the temple knight, the situation Rain faced was almost a dead end. Because even if Rain possessed great strength, at most, he could maintain the breakthrough for about 2 minutes. What about after 2 minutes? What to do then? Defeat was the only outcome waiting for him. Magini, perhaps, it's time to use that move. With a grave expression, Rudolph said to the severely wounded temple knight Magini beside him. Magini's expression turned serious. He immediately knocked on his chest with his right hand wearing an iron glove, firmly stating, "Instructor, to return to the embrace of the goddess is my long-held desire. To sacrifice myself for the eradication of evil in this world is my honor." Well done, Magini. Rudolph patted the shoulder of the last remaining young temple knight, sighing inwardly. It had come to this after all. The church had underestimated the intelligence from the Nightingale Forest, but upon reflection, this seemed inevitable. Recently, the manpower at the church had been too tight. The situation around Meister County was increasingly troubling, with a surge of mysterious incidents, and the church simply couldn't gather enough hands. However, before returning to the embrace of the goddess, let's take this flesh tree spirit with us. Just as the young temple knight named Magini was about to use a secret technique, Rudolph stopped him, saying, "Let Rain deal with more roots to create the best combat conditions. Once he can't hold on, we'll step in. That way, our chance of killing the flesh tree spirit will be higher." Magini nodded emphatically. Meanwhile, Lagare's face was solemn, her lips tightly pursed, holding the blood-etched steel shield with her fingers so tightly clenched that her knuckles turned white. This was the second time she had felt this sense of helplessness. The pain of being unable to do anything while her teammates struggled beside her was just too much. She swore that if she survived this incident, she would definitely take part in a life and death trial. The three of them were intently watching the rapidly moving orb of blades, for when it stopped, it would be Magini and Rudolph's moment to use their final coup de grace. At the top of the temple hall, a pair of sharp eagle eyes watched Rain, his expression shifting from disdain at first to admiration now. Time ticked by second. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Rudolph and the young knight Magini looked at each other, both seeing surprise in each other's eyes. How can Rain hold on for so long? That's way too long. Magini couldn't help but exclaim. Seeing the surprise on the faces of the two men, the heavy-hearted Laguerre seemed to remember something, her expression rare and briefly lit with a smile, saying, Rain has great stamina. Sometimes I train with him all day, I'm exhausted, but he still looks energized and hardly tired at all. I'm quite sure Rain's endurance is extraordinary. Rudolph and Magini heard this, their faces showing a curious look, exchanging glances. Endurance, their practice. Was it serious practice? You're exhausted and he's still energized. Can I say I don't believe it? I've never heard of the land being weary, the ox not tired. Moreover, you're not an ordinary woman, you're a barbarian woman. Even your stamina can't withstand it. The two thought to themselves, but Laguerre didn't seem to notice that her words had caused a misunderstanding among the two men beside her. Her beautiful eyes were completely focused on Rain. Although she had just heard about the instructor Rudolph and the Temple Knight's last desperate strategy, she still planned to rush forward with her shield to protect Rain if his situation turned dire. Even if it was just to block a single blow, she would rush up without hesitation. At this moment, Rain's physical strength had nearly reached its limit, but his heart was not panicking at all. Because he had cheats, add points, and recover, he was hesitating about how to add points. Right now he had 3 choices for adding points. One was to add to his physical strength, which was also the most enduring choice. The second was agility, to move a bit faster, which naturally was safer. And lastly, adding points to his spirit. The reason for the option to add points to spirit was to prepare for a subsequent attack on the flesh tree spirit itself. After battling for so long, he wasn't just thinking about giving the flesh tree spirit a shave and retreating, was he? Naturally, he wanted to find a way to kill the foe. Just then, Rain had a sudden guess. That was, since the flesh tree spirit was called a tree spirit, was there a possibility that it was particularly afraid of fire? Although he couldn't verify this immediately, as long as Rain could get close to its body, he could attack it with the 2 fire-based witchcraft spells he knew, Scorching Touch and High Temperature Force Field. However, considering the situation, the opponent was moving quickly and had very powerful attacks, leaving very limited time for Rain to cast witchcraft. Moreover, even if he could successfully cast the witchcraft Scorching Touch, if the duration was too short, it might not inflict significant damage on the opponent. This point had been verified in a previous encounter with Adams. Otherwise, the 2000-degree high temperature should have carbonized Adams's body directly. Therefore, upon considering this, increasing the power of the witchcraft was crucial. But how to enhance the power of the witchcraft? The only solution Rain knew of was to increase his spiritual power. While fighting and thinking, Rain quickly made a decision to add points to his spirit. Although whether he added points to his physical strength, agility, or spirit, none could guarantee that he would definitely be able to kill the flesh tree spirit. But by adding points to his spirit, the power of his witchcraft would increase, which meant that his chances of successfully killing the flesh tree spirit would be higher. His spiritual power increased from 20 points to 21 points. In an instant, Rain felt a rush of warmth pumping out from his heart, spreading rapidly to his limbs. This instantly filled Rain with vitality, and the exhaustion and sense of power depletion that followed his limit break vanished without a trace. For some reason, the famous prose poem The Seagull by the great writer Gorky from his previous life flashed through Rain's mind. This is the brave seagull, flying proudly amidst the roaring sea and through the lightning. It is the prophet of victory shouting, let the storm come more fiercely. Looking at the dense blood-flesh roots coming at him from all angles, Rain felt like the seagull facing the storm. He himself was like that brave yet tiny seagull. It was time to duel with the stormy winds and terrifying waves. The next second, under the watchful eyes of the 3 humans and 1 eagle at his side, Rain, who had already shown signs of fatigue and seemed likely to fall at any moment, suddenly appeared, as though some divine art of time reversal had been cast on him, returning to the state he was in 3 minutes ago when he first activated Limit Break. At that moment, Rain swung his greatsword, and the momentum of his sword surprisingly maintained an extraordinarily stable state once again. It was as fluent and filled with strength as when the battle had first begun, continuing to shave the blood-flesh tree spirit as if wielding a razor. Young Knight Magini gaped with his mouth wide open, and his eyes suddenly grew twice as large, completely dumbfounded. His expression was exactly like that of the class's slacker, who upon facing a particularly hard question at the end of an extremely difficult test, is utterly shocked. Even the experienced instructor Rudolph was not much better than Magini at this moment. He too stared blankly at Rain, who had wound up his clockwork again, with disbelief written all over his face. Only Laguerre's expression was somewhat more normal. After all, she had witnessed Rain's endurance during their sparring sessions. But even then she was slightly taken aback this time. Laguerre glanced at the two beside her with an "I told you Rain has a lot of endurance, but you wouldn't believe me" expression. After a few seconds, the instructor Rudolph and Knight Magini, with their mouths wide open, finally closed them and swallowed, glancing at Laguerre at their side. Seemingly a bit embarrassed, they immediately turned to look at each other, and in each other's eyes they saw full-blown shock and incomprehension. "Girl, you said this. Rain is enduring, but this kind of endurance is just too much." Instructor Rudolph's face twitched a few times, and though he remained silent, he was screaming in his mind, and the eagle at the top of the hall had been about to fly down to rescue earlier. But just as it flapped its wings, the situation stabilized again. Now, even the sharp eyes of the eagle seemed bewildered. Meanwhile, Rain was fighting more smoothly and more effortlessly by the second, because the memories of the LV7 giant bear sword technique that had just been infused into him had been completely assimilated by him after the recent combat. At the same time, Rain had some new ideas about the use of skill points. It seems, for seemingly basic skills like swordsmanship and hammer skill, once raised to a higher level before adding points, the benefits one receives are no less valuable than those from upgrading some rare skills. Seeing their teammate Rain performing so well, Instructor Rudolph and Knight Magini naturally would not foolishly rush forward to use their ultimate moves and fight desperately with the blood-flesh tree spirit. After all, a bad life was better than a good death. So time passed, second by second, 2 more minutes went by. Altogether, it was now 6 minutes later. Instructor Rudolph and Knight Magini were already mesmerized by the continuous action they were witnessing. It was like seeing a class of dozens of students running 1,000 meters, and just as they started, a boy suddenly sprinted at the pace of a 100-meter dash. Almost everyone thought that this boy, at that speed, would do well to last half a lap. But instead, he whizzed a full 400 meters in a sprint, and then continued at that high speed. Rain, on the brink of physical exhaustion once more, glanced at his panel and silently added points. As his spiritual power increased from 21 points to 22 points instantaneously. Another rush of warmth pumped from his heart to his limbs. This revived Rain in full health once again. Suddenly, his body was filled with vigor, the fatigue vanished, and he was ready to fight a 300 rounds battle with the blood-flesh tree spirit. Rain's state, which seemed to be like an eternal motion machine, finally caught the blood-flesh tree spirit's surprise and attention. Or its blood-flesh tendrils, though numerous, couldn't withstand such relentless assault from Rain. Now, under Rain's unwavering shaving, the blood-flesh tree spirit's tens of meters long body surface had been shaved into patch after patch of bald spots. That is to say, as long as Rain could maintain his current state for a few more minutes, he would undoubtedly shave the blood-flesh tree spirit into a bald stump. Moreover, under Rain's relentless disturbance, the blood-flesh tree was also in extreme discomfort. Its main body still hadn't completely healed from the penetrating wound caused by the high-level divine art sword of judgment. According to the previous healing speed, it should have healed 5 minutes earlier. But now, because of Rain's interference, the huge wound had only shrunk from the size of a wash basin to the size of a fist. The underlying reason was that many of the roots that could have been used to heal the wound were cut off by Rain and scattered on the ground. The blood-flesh tree's intelligence was not low, and it knew it could not go on like this. If this continued, it might indeed be ground to death by this little thing before it. All of a sudden, its upper body shot up, and those fine tendrils that had been writhing inside the wound of the piercing injury all retracted at once. The next second, the blood-flesh treant faced Rain and launched into a leap followed by a death roll attack. Rain's pupils contracted as he quickly executed a side roll to dodge. Just now, that was how the blood-flesh treant had swallowed the lightly wounded Temple Knight whole. So, although the blood-flesh treant had been using its roots to fight Rain up until now, Rain had always been on guard for this powerful move. If this move hit directly, it would likely mean certain death. As expected, it tried the move again. The blood-flesh treant's massive maw brushed past Rain, its huge body moving with incredible speed, carrying vast kinetic energy. In an instant, the nearly 20-meter-long blood-flesh treant streaked by like a meteor, smashing a massive hole in the sturdy white marble walls of the temple. Dust and debris filled the air. Additionally, Rain noticed that whenever the blood-flesh treant itself began to attack, its healing completely stopped, probably due to large energy consumption or because the attack would tear at the wound. No wonder it had not engaged in the attack with its main body before. The blood-flesh treant rose again, shaking its enormous body as if the collision with the wall had left it somewhat dizzy. However, when it came to its senses and realized it had not hit Rain, it seemed exceedingly irate. After re-establishing Rain's location, the blood-flesh treant let out a skyward roar. The next second, it inhaled a large breath of air, its body swelling in size, and then spat out clumps of bloody mucus from its gaping maw, spraying in all directions without a blind spot. This scene, akin to a volcanic eruption, nearly covered the entire temple hall, leaving Rudolph and the other two in the corner with no escape. Facing this witchcraft-like attack from the blood-flesh treant, Rudolph's face paled, regretting not having taken measures sooner. Now, even if he and Magini used their final trump card, it would be too late. The Temple Knight Magini immediately raised his steel shield to cover Rudolph. Lagare, meanwhile, was crouching with her agile body, fixated on Rain with her beautiful eyes, holding a blood rune shield in her left hand, her strong, shapely legs tensed, ready to pounce like a leopard. Lagare seemed poised to rush to Rain's side, ready to block the blood-flesh treant's spew with her shield. But the next second she froze. The same happened to the elf, transformed into an eagle on the ceiling. It was about to swoop down and use hurricane technique to help, but she too halted her dive. Rain, in front of the blood-flesh treant, boldly stepped forward without flinching, calmly retrieving a scroll from his arms. I had intended to save this sorcery scroll Extreme Cold Wind for the certification exam later, but it looks like I'll have to use it here, Rain said softly, with a hint of regret. While talking to himself, he did not slow his movements, quickly channeling a trace of spiritual power into the Extreme Cold Wind sorcery scroll and slightly controlling the direction of release. Suddenly, a freezing gust of wind appeared out of nowhere, blowing over a dozen meters in front of Rain, nearly engulfing the massive blood-flesh treant completely. The next second, this frigid wind collided head-on with the bloody mucus spit out by the treant. The power of the cold far exceeded Rain's expectations, as the bloody mucus instantly froze upon contact, falling to the ground like large chunks of ice and shattering with a crack. And it wasn't over yet. After freezing the bloody mucus, the cold gust still had enough force to head straight for the treant itself. The recent spewing had greatly drained the blood-flesh treant's energy. It was seen gasping heavily. The wound piercing its body widened again, and aside from a few of its larger roots, the rest had fallen off. Facing the onslaught of the extreme cold, the blood-flesh treant, too slow to effectively dodge or block, was quickly covered in heavy white frost and crystals, its moving and attacking speed significantly reduced, as though it had gone from an agile monkey to a wobbly old woman nearly 90 years old. Additionally, due to the huge temperature difference in the air, the temple hall was filled with an enormous amount of dense, white fog at this time, obscuring Rain's figure, making even the unusually large flesh tree spirit unclear. At this moment, Rain stomped his right foot heavily and swung the greatsword in his hands. Like an arrow released from a bow, he rapidly shot toward the true body of the flesh tree spirit. Along the way for more than 10 meters, there was a constant crack sound as the white roots kept falling to the ground. Under the influence of the low temperature, these originally tough roots had become extremely fragile. Thus, dozens of white tendrils were cleared by Rain in an instant, creating a long, direct pathway to the flesh tree spirit's trunk. Rain shook the glimmering greatsword in his hands, and in the next second, he was already beside the trunk of the flesh tree spirit. As Rain's left hand rested on the rough skin of the flesh tree spirit, a deep incantation began to resonate from his mouth. Yes, Rain was casting the level 2 sorcery scorching touch he had mastered. After a brief spell chant of just over 2 seconds, a red glow emerged from Rain's palm and quickly penetrated into the rough skin of the flesh tree spirit. 22 points of spiritual power significantly enhanced the potency of Rain's scorching touch. Although it was not yet known by how much, it was sure to be significantly more than before. In an instant, Rain felt as if he had ignited a powder keg. It seemed that the flesh tree spirit's body was filled with gasoline, just lacking a fuse, and his scorching touch was that match. Suddenly, Rain's expression drastically changed, and he quickly retreated. The next second, boom, the flesh tree spirit let out a scream. The area that Rain had just touched exploded into a gigantic cavity half a person tall, and furthermore, blazing flames continued to burn the body of the flesh tree spirit at the wound. The roots around were frantically trying to extinguish the flames on the wound. Because they had been slowed down by the extreme cold wind sorcery scroll, the firefighting effort was not effective. This caused the burning to gradually become more intense. Rain was immediately overjoyed. Obviously, this verified that his previous judgment was accurate. This flesh tree spirit, bearing the word tree in its name, indeed feared fire. Rain felt that he should really thank the person who first named the flesh tree spirit. Precise naming contained the key to defeating the enemy. Almost without hesitation, Rain decided he must definitely take advantage of the situation. Using the words of a great man, "It is right to press home the pursuit and drive the beaten enemy. It is not fitting to exploit one's reputation and play the tyrant." Immediately, Rain propelled himself forward again, rapidly circling around the flesh tree spirit, attacking whenever an opportunity arose, and would release the scorching touch sorcery on other parts of the flesh tree spirit. Although the flesh tree spirit instinctively tried its best to dodge Rain's attacks, having suffered from the extreme cold wind sorcery, its body, including the roots, moved significantly slower and was utterly unable to avoid Rain's strikes and approaches. Thus, within just a few more than 10 seconds, several parts of the flesh tree spirit's body were ignited by Rain. With multiple parts exploding consecutively, it seemed to trigger some sort of chain reaction. Suddenly, the nearly 20-meter-long body of the flesh tree spirit stopped moving. It no longer avoided Rain's attacks, but started to tremble slightly. The next second, the vast body of the flesh tree spirit suddenly swelled and glowed a fiery red. At this moment, its body seemed to be filled with magma, much like a volcano about to erupt. Immediately, Rain was startled and quickly retreated. He was still quite worried about whether the flesh tree spirit had any other trump cards, or some kind of desperate last resort move. But the next second under Rain's watch, the vast body of the flesh tree spirit sharply contracted back and rapidly shriveled, all the while emitting a large amount of pungent, foul-smelling black smoke. And its densely packed tendrils at this time seemed to have suddenly lost all vitality, hanging limply and motionlessly. It seemed that the swelling and contracting had released all the energy inside the flesh tree spirit in one go. For a moment, the flesh tree spirit was utterly silent. At this time, the system prompt sounded. Your skill giant bear sword technique has been upgraded. Experience plus 1,291. Your skill scorching touch has been upgraded. Experience plus 35. You have experienced a battle. Knight. Transcendent. Experience plus 276. Wizard apprentice. Transcendent. Experience plus 112. Upon seeing this, Rain immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, although the flesh tree spirit was formidable, it didn't have any second phase or transformation. At this moment, it should truly be dead. What is this? Rain keenly noticed. Under the carcass of the flesh tree spirit, he seemed to sense a special faint aura. This aura, which Rain was encountering for the first time, was filled with a sense of vitality, grandeur, and spirituality, and also seemed to carry an indescribable evil. Immediately, Rain swiftly cut open the bottom of the flesh tree spirit. There, a crystal the size of a walnut and a pale gold little tree enveloped in a fist-sized transparent membrane appeared before Rain's eyes. Hiss, this is. The sensation he had just perceived was likely the aura of the pale gold little tree, which was entirely a pale gold color, seemingly divine. But the sharp-eyed Rain noticed that beneath its pale gold exterior, there seemed to be a stream of black energy continuously flowing. The aura of that crystal was quite similar to the energy crystal dropped by the evil spirit Knight, only it was thicker and more vast. After some thought, Rain lifted the crystal with the tip of his sword and took it out. As soon as it was in his hand, a system prompt sounded. Ding! Detected unknown energy that can be absorbed. Do you wish to absorb it? Note: after absorption, it can be converted into specified professional experience points. As expected, this must be a kind of energy body that is even more advanced than the energy crystal. After all the hard work, it was finally time for the harvest. Rain felt a surge of joy in his heart and didn't hesitate to choose yes. Next second, the thick black energy that flowed within the walnut-sized crystal suddenly rushed into Rain's body through his arm. Just like last time, this time Rain once again didn't feel any discomfort, and the whole absorption and conversion process was over. Ding! A total of 1,536 supernatural experience points converted. Please choose to upgrade Knight, Transcendent, /Wizard Apprentice, Transcendent, /Beast Tamer, Transcendent, Tusk. The Flesh Tree Spirit is mighty. Rain found that he had started to like the unholy things of the Mother Tree sect. The rewards are too generous. After pondering for a while, Rain decided to continue selecting Beast Tamer, Transcendent. To add points, the reason was simple: he could slowly accumulate experience for Knight or Wizard Apprentice through combat, but not for Beast Tamer. Moreover, he was currently a Beast Tamer, Transcendent, LV3, 12/500. Choosing to add points to Beast Tamer would allow him to level up twice. But if he chose Knight or Wizard Apprentice, he could only rise by one level. As for Blacksmith not being prompted, it's because, in Rain's view, Blacksmith isn't a transcendent profession, so it isn't difficult to level up. As Rain silently thought Beast Tamer, instantly, 2 consecutive system prompts appeared. Congratulations, your Beast Tamer Transcendent profession level has increased. Congratulations, your Beast Tamer Transcendent profession level has increased. Seeing the Beast Tamer Transcendent level change from LV3, 12/500 to LV5, 48/2000 on the panel, Rain couldn't help but show a brilliant smile. He continued to read on. Gazing at the bottom of the panel revealed remaining attribute points, 3, and remaining skill points, 5. The remaining attribute points were back to 3, and the remaining skill points had reached an astonishing 5. This gave Rain the thrilling sense of getting richer and stronger with each battle. Since the pale golden sapling still hadn't been checked, Rain didn't linger in the joy of leveling up for long, but immediately took out the pale golden sapling, which was the size of a small fist, from the body of the Flesh Tree Spirit. At that moment, the system prompt sounded again. Ding! Detected that the host has obtained a Mother Tree seed, triggering a class transfer Mother Tree Priest Transcendent. The prerequisites for transferring to Mother Tree Priest are 1. Knight, Transcendent, LV3 or above, Wizard Apprentice, Transcendent, LV3 or above, 2. Constitution, 15 points or above. Spirit, 18 points or above, 3. Belief in the Mother Tree or use of the Mother Tree seed. Conditions met. Do you wish to transfer to Mother Tree Priest, Transcendent? Hiss. Facing the class transfer information prompted by the system, Rain's eyes suddenly widened. This was the first time he had seen prerequisites for a class transfer that was so demanding. It actually required both Knight and Wizard Apprentice to be LV3 or above. Rain's brain whirred rapidly, and after a few seconds he resolutely clicked no. The reason was simple: the Mother Tree sect had been listed as a cult by the Empire. If he transferred to become a Mother Tree Priest, Transcendent, he would naturally be opposing the Empire, and Rain didn't believe that the transcendent profession of Mother Tree Priest could bring benefits matching the huge risks. Ding! Detected that the Mother Tree seed contains a large amount of life energy. Do you wish to absorb it? Note: after absorption, the Mother Tree seed will be destroyed. Could it be like this? After a brief thought, Rain chose yes. Since he wasn't transferring classes, it was natural to use it for absorption. At least it was all for his own benefit. In an instant, a stream of warm energy that made Rain feel indescribably cozy emanated from the pale golden Mother Tree seed, a sensation that the phrase ecstatic couldn't describe even 1/10 of. At the same time, 4 quiet system prompts arrived. Congratulations! Your Constitution attribute has increased. Congratulations, your Strength attribute has increased. Congratulations, your Agility attribute has increased. Congratulations, your Spirit attribute has increased. This. All attributes +1. The Mother Tree seed is amazing. Bring me a dozen, please. Rain, coming back to his senses, hadn't expected to receive 4 system prompts in one go. At this time, the white mist also began to gradually dissipate. In the corner of the hall, Rudolph, Laguerre, and Magini was staring blankly at the clearly dead flesh tree spirit, and at Rain, who stood nearby, sword in hand. For a moment, the three of them didn't know what to say. Things had changed so rapidly. In the span of half a minute, the flesh tree spirit that had been gaining the upper hand was now motionlessly sprawled at Rain's feet. At this moment, under the sunlight seeping into the hall, Rain was coated in a soft golden glow, making him seem especially tall. And the flesh tree spirit, which had once been like a small mountain, was now charred throughout and emitting plumes of black smoke, completely reduced to a backdrop for the golden light. Then Rudolph, coming to a realization, furrowed his brows, stepped forward for a closer look at Rain, and slowly began to ask, "Rain, the wide-area frost attack you just performed, that was witchcraft, wasn't it?" He had just turned his sight away because it was blocked by Magini, so he did not see the scene when Rain pulled out the sorcery scroll. Rain looked up and saw the expression on head priest Rudolph's face, a mix of joy and faint worry, and immediately understood what was going on. It seemed that Jenny had been right last time. The church and the followers of the Orthodox Knight's path were quite opposed to witchcraft and the ways of the wizard. Rain expressed understanding of this, as it was somewhat similar to the strife over the Orthodox path in the immortal hero novels of his previous life, or the differences between the capitalists and socialists in modern society. "That's correct, head priest Rudolph. I just used a sorcery scroll confiscated from a wizard apprentice named Arctic Wind." Upon hearing it was from the spoils of war, Rudolph's brow immediately relaxed, and his expression softened significantly, nodding and saying, "That's good. Witchcraft is indeed very powerful, but its learning process is fraught with many unpredictable dangers." After a pause, Rudolph continued, "And divine arts are not only more powerful but also safer. Rain, I hope you understand this naturally." Rain was not going to argue this matter with Rudolph at this time, and simply smiled a little and nodded again. However, all of a sudden, Rain looked around with a puzzled expression. Right after he had killed the blood flesh treant, he had felt a subtle sense of being watched. This feeling was very faint. Rain looked up again and saw several birds fluttering away at the top of the hall, so he slightly shook his head and thought to himself, "Maybe I'm just being too sensitive, mistaking the curious prying of some birds and beasts for the prying of intelligent beings." Just then, something Rudolph said made Rain's heart skip a beat. He only heard Rudolph muttering doubtfully to himself, "That's not right. After the death of a creature like the blood flesh treant, there should have been at least large chunks of evil energy crystals. Even normally, there should be shards of evil energy left behind. How could there be absolutely nothing? Rain, did you see anything like the crystals that drop when evil spirit knights die?" Rudolph turned and asked. "Haha, no, I really didn't. By the way, head priest Rudolph, could it be because the high-level divine arts sword of judgment you cast was too powerful?" Rain laughed. "Sorry about that, head priest Rudolph, it's just that I've absorbed them already, and I can't exactly spit them back out for you. It's possible." Rudolph frowned and pondered for a while, nodding his head, seeming to accept Rain's explanation. "Head priest, then let's retreat now, shall we?" Rain, feeling somewhat guilty, quickly suggested. After all, the high-level divine art scroll sword of judgment did play an extremely important role in killing the blood flesh treant, but now the issue was that Rain had swallowed all the benefits himself. Wait, there must be something of the Mother Tree sect that required the protection of the blood flesh treant here. Or rather, there must be something very important to the Mother Tree sect here. Otherwise, the blood flesh treant and evil spirit knights wouldn't have emerged out of nowhere. Could it be that thumb-sized pale golden sapling? Head priest, can I say that I've absorbed it too? Rain sneakily glanced at Rudolph, who was searching around, and felt even more guilty. But at this moment, he could only remain silent, following behind head priest Rudolph, pretending to search around the perimeter of the temple hall. Suddenly, Knight Magini in the center of the hall shouted, "Head priest, there's a stone slab here." Rain raised an eyebrow. There really was something. The two of them promptly walked over and saw that underneath the original position of the treant, Magini had unearthed a black obsidian slab more than 1 meter long, written with something in an ancient language, Akkadian. Rudolph nodded confidently and said, "This must be it." Was the blood flesh treant guarding this slab? Knight Magini asked curiously beside him. As a knight of the church's temple, he hadn't studied this kind of spiritual text. On normal days, he was so busy learning combat skills and prayers that he naturally couldn't afford to divert his attention to anything else. However, Rudolph, as the head of the clergy, did have a certain degree of research on spiritual text. "Great Mother Tree, following. The most humble servant, I beseech you. Rain initially watched with surprise, scrutinizing it closely for a moment, but soon he lost interest. Because if he wasn't mistaken, this appeared to be a ritual text or prayer, namely, the ritual language used during sacrifices to pray to the so-called Mother Tree. Clearly, to him, this was almost meaningless. He wasn't a priest of the Mother Tree. Had Rain just changed his occupation to priest of the Mother Tree, then this prayer would have been quite useful and worth studying seriously, but now not so much. Majini, dig this thing out and bring it back, Rudolph said after pondering for a moment. Although Rudolph, after translating, also believed that this seemed to just be an ordinary prayer, he thought carefully and surmised that the obsidian tablet, which the black flesh tree spirit was guarding, must possess some special purpose or significance. It was just that, possibly due to his lack of expertise in this area. He couldn't immediately discern the importance of the obsidian tablet. Watching as the temple knight Majini huffed and puffed to dig out the heavy obsidian tablet, Rain cast a dubious glance at Rudolph and thought, "Head of the clergy, do you really think the black flesh tree spirit was guarding this tablet?" Soon after, Rain and his party returned the way they had come, back to the entrance of the temple garden. At that moment, seeing Rain's party emerge, the night watchman and the peace officers immediately surrounded them. After a brief conversation, upon hearing that there was a monster inside, nearly 20 meters long, everyone clicked their tongues in amazement. From the expressions on their faces, they all seemed relieved. Otherwise, judging from the bodies of the fallen knights, it was clear that these ordinary people would have suffered horrific casualties or even a total annihilation. Realizing this, the short Matteo and the other night watchmen looked at their own peace deputy officer Rain with grateful eyes. After Rain and his companions left the temple hall, the eagle perched at the top of the hall finally fluttered its wings and flew down. As it was about to land, the eagle suddenly transformed into a black-haired elf. The tall, slender figure calmly walked over to the carcass of the black flesh tree spirit and began to investigate. Strange, the sorcery scroll that the human knight tore open was clearly of the Frost series, but the black flesh tree spirit clearly died from fire-based witchcraft, the black-haired elf said with a puzzled expression. She had just witnessed the entire battle, but shortly after Rain tore open the sorcery scroll gale of extreme cold, a dense fog filled the entire hall. By then, no one except Rain himself could see clearly what Rain was doing. Thus, the black-haired elf's confusion wasn't surprising. Could it be that the human knight just now used fire-based witchcraft? The black-haired elf quickly thought of a possibility. Perhaps it was because he carried a fire-based witchcraft scroll with him. This aura is. The black-haired elf's eyes suddenly widened, her cherry lips parting in an incredulous expression, because she had just sensed a trace of the identical aura from the elven mother tree seed. She was naturally all too familiar with this aura. It was almost identical. No, this should be the aura of the seed of the dark mother tree, the one worshipped by the sect of the mother tree. The next second, the black-haired elf reacted. As soon as he thought of the dangers posed by the dark tree seed, the black-haired elf's expression changed, and she muttered to herself, "No. I need to go and retrieve the dark tree seed. The only one who had the chance to take the seed just now would be the young knight who used the sorcery scroll." The image of Rain, the young knight wielding the dual-handed greatsword, instantly came to the mind of the black-haired elf. The very next second, the black-haired elf transformed into an eagle once more and soared into the sky. Soon, she caught up with Rain and his group, who were preparing to return from the temple garden's entrance. Half an hour later, "Captain, there's something odd about that eagle circling above us for quite a few rounds." A night watchman noticed the eagle above and turned to speak to his captain, Matteo. Matteo also looked up for a moment and nodded, saying, "Indeed, something isn't right. It seems to be tracking our squadron. Could it be that a falconer from some unknown forces is nearby?" Matteo's expression turned serious as he considered this, and then kicked his horse's sides firmly to accelerate and approached Rain, who was conversing with Lagare, to report, "Adjutant, sir, there's an eagle in the sky constantly tracking us. I suspect there is a falconer from unknown forces nearby." An eagle? Rain looked up questioningly. He saw several birds flying across the sky, but none were eagles, which meant there was no trace of an eagle in the sky at that moment. "Matteo, there's no eagle." There definitely was one just now." Matteo scratched his head, momentarily confused. However, it was clear since the eagle was no longer there, it was most likely his overthinking. Perhaps The eagle was merely chasing its prey that happened to be near their group. In fact, at the very moment when Mateo looked up, the black-haired elf, in the guise of the eagle, had realized that her circling behavior had likely attracted the attention of certain individuals in the group below. Therefore, she decided to fly in the direction the group was moving and landed not far ahead of them. Before quickly transforming into a squirrel, which scampered up the high canopy of an oak tree to observe the group. The scrutiny of a squirrel would naturally not raise any alarm, not even for Rain, despite his remarkably keen senses. After all, in the Nightingale Forest, where wild beasts are abundant, if the scrutiny of a squirrel were to be of concern, then there would be far too many such scrutinizing gazes to be wary of. Half a day later, the group returned to Flashgold Town, and Hamilton was already waiting at the administrative hall's entrance to greet everyone. As soon as the group entered Flashgold Town, a security officer notified him. Seeing Rain and the night watchman of Flashgold Town mostly safe and sound, a look of relief quickly spread across Hamilton's face. However, when he noticed the several stretchers being carried at the back of the group, and the two-man shortage in the nightly group from the church, Hamilton's smile faded. After some inquiries, Hamilton looked astonished. He had not expected that what seemed to be a secure mission dealing with the evil spirit knight would turn out to have such unexpected and twisted developments. Firstly, the number of evil spirit knights had suddenly surged to 3, and they all possessed almost the strength of peak knights. Secondly, inside the dilapidated temple hall was an ancient cult's relic, the Mother Tree sect. And there existed creatures like the flesh tree spirits, with strength equivalent to that of a great knight. This made it difficult for Hamilton to imagine just how intense the battle had been. However, what particularly puzzled him was why his own elite night watchmen were mostly unharmed, whereas the church's knights, who were much stronger and had stepped into transcendence, suffered such heavy casualties. The 2 surviving knights were severely injured, and 2 honorably fallen knights lay on the stretchers. And why did his own adjutant Rain, after such a brutal battle, not only appear unscathed but also seem full of vigor? Such a state would make more sense to Hamilton if Rain had just woken up from an afternoon nap. Rain's aura. How does it feel like his strength has progressed again? Hamilton's eyes widened as he looked at Rain, evidently taken aback. However, before Hamilton could ask for details, Rudolph approached with a grave expression. "Father Rudolph, your efforts are commendable. The Empire will surely honor and provide compensation for the 2 fallen knights of the church," Hamilton said to Rudolph. "Lord Hamilton, this time, we owe much gratitude to Flashgold Town's adjutant Rain for his significant support. Without him, our losses might have been even more severe," Rudolph said, glancing at Rain and speaking to Hamilton. This is what we in Flashgold Town ought to do." Hamilton was taken aback upon hearing this, because by the sound of it, Rain must have played a crucial role in the mission. Otherwise, given Rudolph's typically rigid demeanor, he would not likely make such nice remarks for mutual flattery. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, the church's group led by Father Rudolph did not continue their stay in Flashgold Town. Instead, they arranged for 2 carriages and set out for the county town overnight. The urgency was due to the need for immediate treatment for the 2 grievously injured knights. In addition, Rudolph also needs to report to the bishop as soon as possible about the discovery of the ancient cult's Mother Tree sect ruins. However, before leaving, Rudolph specifically sought out Rain for a brief chat. "Rain, the doors of the Monsoon and Ocean Goddess Church will always be open for you. Besides, I will report your performance in this incident to Lord Bishop." Soon as Rudolph had left, an incredibly curious Hamilton pulled Rain into his office to ask for details. Just now, with the church's personnel present, there had been many things Hamilton naturally felt uncomfortable to inquire about. "Lord, there's not much to say, actually." Once Rain had succinctly described both battles, Hamilton understood why Rudolph had placed such importance on Rain. He would have done the same in his position. Originally, he had thought that the church's heavy casualties meant that they were undoubtedly the ones who had contributed most to resolving this mysterious incident. Even his own night watchman team probably had merely engaged in some alert duties, which was why they had so few casualties. But the outcome was beyond his expectations. Rain almost single-handedly turned the tide, representing the night watchman of Flashgold Town, representing him, making a key contribution to this incident. "Rain, well done. I will report this situation in the next 2 days. I bet you'll get a hefty reward of merit points soon," Hamilton declared with amazement. Rain's performance in the previous battle against Adams had already surprised Hamilton, but this time it refreshed his understanding once again. "Thank you, my lord," Rain said with a slight bow, smiling. Merit points was certainly desirable, and Rain naturally wouldn't decline them, although he had already gained much from this incident. But who would complain about having too much money, right? However, when he thought about merit points, Rain was reminded that his custom-ordered water membrane steel knight armor would take 2 months to complete, which was simply too long. And the chromium iron set he was currently wearing, after the battles with Adams and the Bloodflesh Treant, was nearly ready to be scrapped. It seemed like he had to make another trip to the military supply department in County Town to exchange for a new set of knight armor for emergencies. Meanwhile, the black-haired elf who had transformed into a squirrel, upon following Rain's team to Flashgold Town, showed a trace of surprise in her gleaming eyes. Isn't this the same place where she had sensed the general location of the amulet? Yes, that's right. It must be within the bounds of this small town. The squirrel-shaped black-haired elf nodded affirmatively. But since the amulet hadn't been triggered for some time, she would need to search carefully to pinpoint its location. However, this matter could be put on hold for the time being, as she first needed to keep a close eye on that young knight. The black-haired elf was also hesitant at the moment. She wasn't sure which approach to take to communicate with the young human knight. The first approach would naturally be to find an opportunity for a private conversation, during which she would explain the danger that the dark elf mother tree seed posed to the world, and then ask him to hand the seed over. But she instinctively felt that humans would not be so understanding and reasonable. The second method would involve sacrificing her own moral character for the safety of the world and quietly taking the seed away. This act would be considered theft, or perhaps stealing, wouldn't it? Therefore, the black-haired elf was at a loss as to which method to choose. After having dinner with Laguerre, Anna, and his family, Rain returned to his room alone. He began to reflect on his own performance in the Battle of Nightingale Forest. Simply put, battle analysis, because only by constantly reflecting and summarizing could he maintain progress. He had already experienced the benefits of doing so. There were 2 battles in total this time. In the first battle, facing the evil spirit knight protected by heavy armor and dark aura, my core hammer skill expertise, combined with the Tockle hammer technique and the pig-headed hammer, achieved a trinity of assault which resulted in tremendous killing power, he thought. This is the best test of the outcome of the post-battle analysis last time. Since the fight with the angel envoy of the Black Flame Church ended, Rain had set a plan to slowly practice hammer skill and utilize the hammer's strong armor piercing and shock damage to inflict heavy injuries on armored foes. This time, the heavy hammer armor-piercing tactic was proven effective against the 3 evil spirit knights. Rain's eyes flickered as he pondered. Additionally, the second battle, against the Bloodflesh Treant, if it hadn't been for Dean Rudolph starting off by casting the high-tier Divine Art Sword of Judgment and inflicting heavy damage on the Bloodflesh Treant, I might not have been able to defeat it despite doing my utmost. However, that's normal, considering that according to Lord Hamilton, the Bloodflesh Treant is an evil creature on the same level as a great knight. Ultimately, I relied on the sorcery scroll Polar Wind and combined it with the elementary-level contact witchcraft Scorching Touch to take it down. To be honest, this stage was much easier than the previous direct confrontation with a greatsword. This shows the undeniable importance of witchcraft. If I can master several witchcraft spells, I'd be able to utilize specific ones according to the enemy's weaknesses, possibly achieving unexpected results. Furthermore, the importance of spiritual power has become increasingly prominent. After all, there's currently no other method for me to enhance the power of witchcraft. Only by strengthening my spiritual power can I simultaneously enhance the power of witchcraft, and that is a clear fact. From this perspective, unless something unusual happens, spirit attribute will be the priority for my future points allocation. As for mastering multiple types of witchcraft, Rain crossed his arms, stroked his chin with his right hand, and began pacing back and forth in the room, pondering. The test crystal has confirmed that I have the strongest affinity for fire energy particles. No, there's another one, the pale silver energy particles that I still haven't figured out. But even including the pale silver energy particles, I only have a relatively high affinity for 2 types of energy particles. Learning other types of witchcraft would be inefficient and less powerful than these 2. I should focus on fire witchcraft first, and as for the others, I'll slowly search for other witchcraft models. After all, the biggest issue I'm currently facing is the scarcity of witchcraft models. Oh, that's right, the meeting Jenny and I scheduled should be tomorrow. Hopefully, the visit to her bestie's library will yield some results. Rain suddenly recalled the arrangement with Jenny, and his eyes brightened. Ever since experiencing the power of witchcraft in actual combat, Rain has been eagerly looking forward to each new type of witchcraft. Also, this ancient sect, the Mother Tree sect that appeared, I have never heard of it. Including that pale golden sapling, I have no clue about its origin. It seems I must pay close attention to various ancient lore next. So, the study of Lingwen Akkadian language must continue. After all, many ancient books were recorded by wizards or wizard apprentices and written in Lingwen. Soon, Rain brought out the 3 Akkadian ancient texts and placed them on his desk. Currently, Rain has made more than half progress in studying these 3 Akkadian ancient texts. He can understand the meanings of most Akkadian words, but his pronunciation and fluency are still not standard, so further reinforcement is needed. While Rain was studiously learning Akkadian, Lagore was restless in the next room. She had decided that she would leave Flashgold Town early the next morning, with the belongings, weapons of her brother and teammates, and return to her barbarian tribe in the Frostwind Prairie of the Northern Empire. This was a task of great significance, one that she was obliged to complete. Because only then would the spirits of her brother and teammates be able to return to the Hall of Heroes. Additionally, she had made up her mind to apply for the trial by life and death with the tribal high priest once she returned to her tribe. She hadn't mentioned either matter to Rain. Especially the latter, she had never planned on sharing with Rain. After spending some time with him, Lagore found that she had developed quite a fondness for this big boy who had saved her twice. If she could successfully complete the trial by life and death, perhaps, there might be a future, but if she failed, in that case, it would mean that from her birth until her return to the Hall of Heroes. She had never been together with a boy she liked, which would be rather regrettable. Maybe tonight I should visit his room, but would doing so hurt Anna? It shouldn't. After all, I might not survive, and even if I do, it's not certain that I'll return or meet Rain again. Soon, Lagore made up her mind. When the night grew deeper, she would go to Rain, and then, before dawn, she would set out alone on her journey back to the Frostwind Prairie. Late at night, just as the dark-haired elf was about to sneak into Rain's bedroom on the 2nd floor, she saw through the window of the hallway that the door to the room next to Rain's was slowly opening. A figure, dressed in a sheer garment with a curvaceous body, silently walked out. The dark-haired elf's eyes showed confusion. She recognized the girl immediately. It was the barbarian girl who had returned from the Nightingale Forest with the young human knight during the day. So, she stopped her actions and quietly observed from the side. Without knocking, the barbarian girl quietly opened the young knight's door, and then swiftly slipped inside the room with a quick turn of her body. The dark-haired elf was very curious. Could it be that the two were planning to discuss some secret matter, and had they specifically chosen midnight for their meeting? Could it possibly be about how to deal with the Dark Mother? Treeseed, thinking this, the dark-haired elf's eyes sparkled. The next second, a squirrel leaped from tree to rooftop of Rain's new home, and quickly ran to Rain's 2nd-floor bedroom window, peeking through the gap. With her dark vision, she could see everything clearly. The next moment, the squirrel she had transformed into wore an extremely human-like expression, with eyes that suddenly widened and mouth agape, yet her tiny hands were firmly covering her eyes. Inside the room, the voluptuous barbarian girl was in a riding position, attempting to tame a male steed, while the young human knight held tightly to the girl's gourd-shaped slender waist. Here follows the omission of 10,000 words. After a fierce battle, as the male steed's endurance was quite astounding and difficult to tame. So, the savage girl ultimately gave up on trying to tame the beast, opting instead to lie down and rest. But perhaps because she was too tired from the day, the girl couldn't rest well all night, no matter whether she lay flat on her stomach or on her knees. That night, the squirrel at Rain's bedroom window came and went, back and forth, but never found the right opportunity to have a good talk with Rain about the serious matter of world safety. As the sky gradually turned white, the squirrel, transformed from a black-haired elf, finally left with a reluctant shake of its head. Actually, Rain had been aware since Lagore quietly entered the room. That familiar scent. He knew the visitor was certainly Lagore. Only he was wondering why Lagore didn't knock before coming in. But the next second he was stunned because a certain part of his body entered an. 10,000 words are omitted here. In the yard, an ant was suddenly entwined by a sticky tongue, and in the next second was swallowed by a lying lizard. After chewing for a while, the lizard felt the ant bursting in its mouth, causing pain to its oral cavity. Therefore, the lizard quickly spit out the bursting ant, Tui Tui, and upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a poison fire ant. Poison fire ants have a self-protection mechanism that secretes a clear toxic fluid from their body surface once attacked, causing paralysis and irritant damage to their enemy. In the darkness of the night, the lizard had not seen clearly that this was not an ordinary ant, hence it mistakenly ate a poison fire ant. Just when the lizard was about to leave, it discovered ants attacking the vulnerable part of its lower half again. This made the lizard furious. It then once more swallowed the audacious ant with its slippery tongue, burst it, and killed it, but the next second hurriedly spat it out again. Unexpectedly, this was another poison fire ant. All night long, the lizard was continuously attacked by poison fire ants at its vulnerable parts, and it persistently swallowed them with its slippery tongue, bursting them, killing them, and then spitting them out. Eventually, as dawn began to break, the lizard fled in a panic. It dared not stay in this accursed place any longer. Damn, the poison fire ants were too many. Despite killing them all night long, there seemed to be no end. The next morning, when Rain woke up, he turned to look at Laguerre, who was still deep in sleep beside him. The barbarian girl, in her sleep, revealed a large expanse of her fair and beautiful chest, her golden hair naturally spread on the white pillow, her delicate nose and cherry lips, a face more exquisite than most of the Empire's women. Just by looking at her face, one would never know that Laguerre came from a barbarian tribe of the Frostwind Prairie of the Empire. Moreover, Rain still hadn't figured out what exactly happened last night. Why did Laguerre suddenly come to his room in the middle of the night? And last night, before he could even ask, suddenly, the battle between the two ignited. On one hand, it was because Laguerre's exquisite face and curvaceous figure were too tempting. On the other hand, it was an issue with Rain himself. Ever since he had become transcendent, his desires in that regard had grown stronger. So when Laguerre fired the first shot of the battle, Rain's powder keg was lit, and the two naturally engaged in a fierce battle. Thinking back to the intense battle of last night, a smile couldn't help but appear on Rain's lips. Couldn't resist stretching out his hand to gently smooth away the messy strands of hair on Laguerre's face. At that moment, perhaps because of Rain's action, the sleeping Laguerre started to stir, her long eyelashes fluttered, and she opened her deep blue eyes to Rain. Laguerre also looked at Rain in front of her, her mind a whirl of confusion, to be honest. This was quite different from what Laguerre had anticipated. Originally, her plan was to come quietly in the middle of the night, stay for a while, and then leave just as quietly. Before dawn, she would leave a letter by Rain's bedside, and then depart from Flashkull Town with her baggage, returning to Frostwind Prairie. After all, in her understanding, it should be the men who become exhausted and then fall into a deep sleep. Even though she knew Rain had incredible stamina, in this respect, surely he would follow the same pattern, right? However, it wasn't until dawn began to break that Rain finally stopped. This not only reshaped her understanding, but it also drained all her energy. Now, she was experiencing a profound physical exhaustion, coupled with a spirited radiance of the mind. It was a complex fusion of contradiction within her. Additionally, this had made it impossible for Laguerre to carry out her original plans. But the thought of possibly encountering Sister Anna upon waking jolted Laguerre back to reality as she said, I have to go now, Rain. Go. Rain raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Yes, I need to take my brother's and everyone else's relics back and hurry to Frostwind Prairie, Laguerre said seriously while looking straight into Rain's eyes. Can't you go back a bit later? Da Vinci from a past life once said, the eyes are the window to the soul, and in fact, Rain had already understood the message in Laguerre's eyes. So Rain did not try to deter Laguerre. But the part of him that was reluctant to let go still asked if she could postpone her departure for a few more days. I'm afraid not. I've stayed too long as it is, and I need to make a trip back to the tribe soon, Laguerre said, lowering her head slightly and giving a gentle shake. Indeed, the answer was as Rain had expected. From their time together over the past days, Rain had come to realize that perhaps due to growing up in the harsh conditions of Frostwind Prairie, Laguerre was resolute and indomitable, certainly not one to be indecisive. In an instant, Rain also understood why Laguerre had taken the initiative to come to his room last night. Because she was leaving. Then when will you come back? Rain asked with a hint of reluctance. I don't know. Lagray shook her head again. She planned to immediately undergo the trial of life and death upon her return to the tribe, and facing the high mortality rate of the trial, she didn't know if she would survive it. She wasn't good at lying, so in response to Rain's question, Lagray really didn't know what to say. Moreover, she did not want to tell Rain or anyone else about her plans to undergo the trial of life and death after returning to her tribe. Rain, I really have to go now. If it gets any later, Anna will be up, Lagray said as she stood up, her striking figure evident and quickly dressed. By the way, you tell everyone for me that I've gone back to the prairie, she added. Watching Lagray's retreating figure, Rain felt a pang of loss. Rain knew all too well that with his current strength, there was so much he couldn't change. Furthermore, he couldn't indulge in transient pleasures at this moment. However, Rain believed that as long as he kept moving forward and breaking through, some things, some people, and some regrets would ultimately shift and change with his will. Breakfast time. Sister Anna, have you seen Sister Lagray? Bohe asked curiously after noticing the absence of one at the breakfast table. I haven't seen her get up, maybe she's still sleeping. Because yesterday's journey to Nightingale Forest was exhausting, Anna said while smiling and patting Bohe's head. About that. Lagray has already left, she's gone back to the Frostwind Prairie, Rain said hesitatingly. Suddenly, several pairs of eyes turned to focus on Rain. Emma, who was sitting nearby, looked at Rain with surprise and asked, Rain, what did you just say? I'm saying Lagray has already left Flashgold Town. She went back to Frostwind Prairie. Rain repeated. Suddenly, the atmosphere at the dining table became tense, and Mother Emma said in a low voice, Rain, you didn't do something to offend her, did you? Rain's heart skipped a beat at her words. Otherwise, why would she leave without even saying goodbye to us? Whenever Lagray saw me, she would always greet me with a smile and call me Aunt Emma. Mother Emma thought for a moment, then cast a suspicious look at Rain and added. This left Rain momentarily unsure of how to explain, but he definitely couldn't admit to anything. How could that be? Maybe Lagray didn't want a goodbye that was too heartfelt. Before Rain could finish speaking, Anna looked at him with bright, sparkling eyes. Suddenly, Rain felt an inexplicable sense of guilt rise within him. Then why did Lagray only say farewell to you? Wouldn't saying goodbye to you make her emotional too? Anna said softly. The gazes of the entire family were once again focused on Rain. In that instant, Rain felt as though he had no defense. After quickly finishing breakfast, Rain went upstairs to the storeroom on the second floor. According to the arrangement with Jenny, he expected a carriage from the Crowley family to come and pick him up a bit later. Before that, Rain could take the opportunity to try and see how many will runes he could visualize at once. Thanks to the battle in Nightingale Forest yesterday, Rain gained another 3 spirit attribute points, reaching a total of 23 points. Hence, compared to the previous 20 points of spiritual power, his progress was significant. Rain clearly remembered that when his spirit attribute had first reached 20 points after he changed his class to Beast Tamer, he could visualize 16 will runes at once and entered the commonly acknowledged level of a second-tier wizard apprentice. Therefore, Rain knew very well that even with 23 points of spirit, it was highly unlikely he could visualize all 24 basic will runes of meditation and reach the level of a third-tier wizard apprentice. However, when a person sees they are getting closer to their goal, or in other words, the distance to their objective is shrinking, their motivation to work hard becomes very strong. 1 minute later, Rain opened his eyes with joy. This time he had successfully visualized 20 will runes, getting ever closer to the final goal of 24. Don't forget, Rain still had 3 free attribute points. However, after pondering for a while, Rain chose not to continue investing points in the spirit attribute right away. After all, the effect of adding points to recover could be a killer move if used well in battle. This was fully re-verified in the battle with the Bloodflesh Treant, so it was a better choice to wait and add points during the next battle. As the carriage hadn't arrived yet, Rain decided to test the changes in the strength of his witchcraft following the increase in his spiritual power. Since he had charred the wooden table last time, Rain had specially brought back a fire-resistant clay mold from the blacksmith's shop a few days ago. The mold was a dark gray color and shaped like a large beaker. Rain placed a small piece of leftover, hardened essence, gold inside the clay mold, and then he began to cast the witchcraft scorching touch. As the deep incantation echoed, the hardened essence gold piece in front of Rain's palm began to heat up rapidly. After a few seconds, it started to redden and emit smoke. With Rain's continuous guidance and the output of spiritual power, the hardened essence gold turned completely into liquid in about 10 seconds. Seeing this, Rain couldn't help but smile. Previously, after about 10 seconds of casting Scorching Touch and sustaining it, the highest temperature he could reach was around 1,400 to 1,500 degrees Celsius. Now, that temperature limit must have reached around 2,000 degrees Celsius. That's because the melting point of hardened essence gold is around 2,000 degrees. Rain remembered that when he last smelted hardened essence gold at the blacksmith's forge, he had to use the forge in combination with Scorching Touch to successfully melt it. But now, Scorching Touch alone was sufficient. This enhancement in witchcraft power was evident, and as his spiritual power grew, his abilities increased accordingly. However, Rain also acutely sensed that the comparative increase in power was not linear as the spiritual power increased. To put it simply, at first, if the spiritual power increased by 1 point, the ultimate temperature of Scorching Touch might increase by 100 degrees, but over time, that increase dropped to 80 degrees or even 70 degrees for each additional point of spiritual power. Though the decrease in this rate of growth was slow, it was definitely occurring. With a slight frown, Rain pondered this for a while and surmised that it might be due to some aspect of the witchcraft model itself. From this perspective, it meant that in the future, he would need to search for higher-level witchcraft to learn. To be precise, choosing to learn witchcraft that suited his current level of strength was the optimal choice. But soon, Rain touched his nose and laughed at himself, with a self-deprecating smile. Now, he was a poor farmer in terms of the number of witchcraft he knew. He was in no position to be picky. Even though he was of the highest affinity to the fire element, he only mastered 2 witchcraft spells. One of these spells was Scorching Touch, an entry-level contact-based witchcraft. Although it had decent power, it came with many limitations in actual combat. For instance, during the battle with the flesh spirit of the tree, it was only with the help of the sorcery scroll Frosty Gale that he found an opportunity to cast it. Moreover, Scorching Touch required continuous guidance to inflict maximum damage. In contrast, the casting and effect of high-temperature force field were much easier. Once successfully cast, high-temperature force field created a high-temperature field around Rain for about a minute. Just as Rain wanted to test how the power of high-temperature force field had changed, he heard the clippity-clop of horse hooves. Looking out the window of the storage room on the 2nd floor, Rain spotted the Crowley family carriage, adorned with the emblem of a rose and kite shield, slowly approaching his home. After tidying up a bit, Rain went downstairs. Just as he reached the carriage, a servant quickly opened the door of the carriage, and 2 beautiful girls dressed in cashmere long skirts and draped in light-colored mink shawls stepped out hurriedly. It was Jenny and her best friend, Agatha. At the first sight of Rain, the noble young lady's eyes lit up instantly. "Lord Rennie, you've become even more manly in just a few days," Jenny couldn't help but praise. "Thank you." Hearing the girl's compliment, Rain felt naturally good. Manly? Well, but in Rain's view, it must have been the increase in his spiritual power that enhanced his charm. "By the way, Lord Rennie, this is my best friend Agatha. You remember her, right?" Jenny blinked and introduced. "Of course, the beautiful Miss Agatha Wiggins. I most certainly remember." "Hello," Rain greeted with a smile. "Lord Rennie, hello." Agatha's face, sprinkled with freckles, flushed slightly as she gave Rain a ladylike curtsy. Although Miss Agatha had some freckles on her nose, it did not detract from her beauty, but instead gave her a youthful vitality. "Lord Rennie, shall we set off now? My father is not at home today, so you can spend more time in the library," Agatha proposed. "Sure, thank you, Miss Agatha." Although Rain found it strange to hear Agatha say this, as it seemed like a young couple hiding from their parents for a secret rendezvous, he couldn't deny the good intentions. Moreover, Rain was quite eager to see if he could find anything valuable in the Wiggins library, so he did not dwell on the awkwardness. The 3 of them boarded the carriage and headed for the Wigging family estate where Agatha lived. Once inside the carriage, Agatha took off her mink shawl, revealing her pale shoulders. The fully blossomed curves of the young girl were youthful and alluring. "Lord Rennie, Jenny has been mentioning you these past few days," she said. "You." "Agatha, stop talking nonsense in front of Lord Rennie." Jenny's face turned red as she immediately covered Agatha's mouth. Agatha, in turn, quickly retaliated by tickling Jenny, and soon the 2 beauties were laughing and playfully tussling with each other. Rain watched the scene unfold with a gentle smile and shook his head slightly without a word. Just minutes before Rain had come downstairs, a squirrel had leaped down from the branches rapidly and slipped into Rain's bedroom through a partly open window. After some searching, the squirrel's large eyes betrayed a very human-like expression of puzzlement. This was because it hadn't found the dark mother tree seed it was looking for, nor even sensed its presence. The squirrel was naturally the transformed elf. It appeared thoughtful, recalling the process of following Rain all the way, including to the sheriff's office, which it had observed from the side. As for last night, the elf had checked every few minutes. Therefore it was certain that if the young knight had not hidden the dark mother tree seed, then it must be carried on his person. Having realized this, the squirrel quickly planned its escape, but in the next second it froze. The bedroom door was quietly opening, and a human girl dressed in a pale gray layered cincture was staring with wide, curious eyes at it. And its gaze was fixated on the wooden amulet on the girl's chest that it recognized all too well. Anna had just heard some rustling from Rain's room and, curious, had opened the door to check, but instead found this adorable squirrel. Seeing how it rummaged through things so cleverly, she assumed it was looking for food. "What a cute little fellow, are you hungry? There's not much to eat here in Rain's room, come here to me," Anna said softly, squatting down and extending her hands towards the squirrel, ready to embrace it. The squirrel hesitated but quickly turned and ran towards the window, disappearing from Anna's sight. Anna couldn't help but feel disappointed. That squirrel had given her a particularly warm feeling, but unfortunately it had run away. The squirrel, still in its guise as the black-haired elf, was now leaping quickly along the roadside trees, pursuing the carriage where Rain was. The dark-haired elf had not expected this at all. She had planned to find the dark elf mother tree seed first, before searching for the amulet. She never anticipated that the two items would be so close to each other. Moreover, she sensed a special blood connection from the human girl. In an instant, she figured out some things. However, the most pressing matter was to quickly catch up with the young knight called Rain. Since he was carrying the seed with him, it was very likely that he intended to trade it. After dealing with this matter, she would come back immediately. As the carriage gradually left Flashgull town and was traveling on the rural road, suddenly Rain, with his sharp hearing, caught the carriage driver mumbling in surprise. "The weather is really too strange." It clearly seemed like a sunny day in the morning, but not long after, fog has started to form. The word fog immediately triggered Rain's alertness. After all, whether it was the dense fog during the appearance of the Iron Maiden automaton or Adams's black fog witchcraft, both were related to fog. Thus, Rain turned his head and looked outside through the carriage window. Indeed, there appeared to be rising fog along the road, dense in some areas and somewhat thinner in others, which looked quite like patches of fog. The carriage quickly entered a particularly dense patch of fog, and visibility dropped from dozens of meters to just a few in an instant. The driver uttered a huh, and the speed of the carriage noticeably slowed down. But Rain suddenly felt his mind grow hazy, as though his head was spinning from hitting a large wave while on a boat, and the next second, the surroundings became eerily quiet. The clear chatter of the two ladies that he was used to hearing suddenly stopped. In his confusion, Rain immediately turned his gaze from outside to inside the carriage. In an instant, his pupils constricted, and he was shocked on the spot, because he discovered that now, inside the carriage, he was the only person left, and Jenny and Agatha had vanished without a trace. This eerie scene made all the hairs on Rain's body stand on end. With his strength as a peak knight, it would be impossible for anyone, even a great knight, to abduct the two women right under his watchful eye. Instantly, Rain thought of Adams, who controlled the black fog. Obviously, only a wizard or someone from another mysterious profession could pull this off. Rain reached behind and gripped the hilt of his greatsword, on guard. It was peculiar to him why his level 3 danger perception had not given him any warning this time. Soon, Rain could feel the carriage gradually come to a stop. Suddenly there was a knocking sound from outside the carriage. Thump, thump, thump. Rain was startled and tightened his grip on the sword hilt. The anticipated attack did not happen, but instead, this enemy had the courtesy to knock on the door. However, Rain quickly realized that it might not necessarily be an enemy. After a thought, Rain opened the carriage door. He saw a tall, slender woman, dressed in a gray robe and wearing a hood, standing a few meters away from the carriage. From the hair that peeked out of her hood, it was an uncommon black. The next second, as if in response to seeing Rain step out of the carriage, she pulled back her hood. revealing a beautiful female face, and those distinctly pointed ears, characteristic of female elves, immediately drew Rain's attention. A female elf, Rain's eyes suddenly widened, and his descent from the carriage froze for a couple of seconds. The dark-haired elf, with a pair of bright eyes framed by long lashes, surveyed Rain and said, "Young man, please do not worry about your two friends. We are currently in the midst of dreams, and at this moment they have fallen into deep sleep without any danger. I have come to ask you to hand over the dark elf mother tree seed to me. Keeping it in the hands of humans is far too dangerous. Of course, I will provide you with a fair compensation." Rain was startled, but he quickly responded, "The dark elf mother tree seed, are you referring to that light golden little tree?" The dark-haired elf's beautiful eyes sparkled with joy as if to say, "It's indeed with you." "Yes, that's the one." Well, Rain was somewhat stumped. He couldn't just admit that it had been absorbed by his system panel. Nor could he mention it had transformed into a superb effect of all attributes +1. "I indeed saw that light golden little tree, but it disappeared from my hands in a moment." Rain thought for a moment and then decided to tell the truth. After all, being absorbed by the system was a fact, and its disappearance from his hands was also a fact. The dark-haired elf frowned slightly, her expression revealing a touch of displeasure. "How is that possible?" "Really?" Rain spread his hands and said, "If you don't believe me, elf lady, you can come and search." The dark-haired elf gave Rain another look and said, "Young man, the other day I saw you release a sorcery scroll, a smart move. Clearly, you are not unfamiliar with witchcraft. I have a natural-based sorcery scroll, Life Blossom, here to trade for the dark elf mother tree seed in your hands." "Elf lady, although I'd like to obtain your sorcery scroll, I really don't have the dark elf mother tree seed." Rain looked earnestly at the dark-haired elf and said, "HM." Perhaps it was because Rhaenys' expression was excessively sincere when he spoke, or it might have been because the black-haired elf could detect lies through some mysterious means. The black-haired elf first looked puzzled, then slowly stepped forward, came up to Rhaenys, and circled around him while his delicate nostrils twitched slightly. The black-haired elf nodded with hesitation and said, "I truly can't sense the presence of the dark mother tree's seed anymore. Could it have really disappeared? Is it possible that its energy was exhausted, or maybe it was harmed by the power of witchcraft?" While smelling the pleasant, grassy fragrance emanating from the black-haired elf, Rhaenys tried to sidestep the issue. "The former is not possible, the latter, although not highly likely, seems to be the only reasonable explanation." The black-haired elf considered and nodded. It seemed he accepted the explanation Rhaenys provided. "Young man, since the dark mother tree's seed is destroyed, there could be nothing better. This is the sorcery scroll Bloom of Life I promised you. Thank you for your honest answer." Saying this, the black-haired elf handed over a sorcery scroll to Rhaenys. "Thank you, Lady Elf." Rhaenys bowed slightly and accepted the sorcery scroll, feeling slightly surprised the moment he touched it. For the material of this sorcery scroll was quite unusual, different from any other sorcery scrolls he had encountered before. From the feel of it, the scroll seemed to be made from the leaves of some large tree, exuding a faint natural scent, unlike typical sorcery scrolls which were primarily made from animal skins. Just as Rhaenys was about to lift his head and inquire about the specific effects of the sorcery scroll Bloom of Life, he was startled to find that the black-haired elf had vanished. After pondering for a moment, Rhaenys stored the sorcery scroll in his waist pouch. He then returned to the carriage and began to ponder the events that had just occurred. Suddenly, that slight dizziness reappeared, and quickly. Rhaenys noticed the fog outside the window clearing rapidly. Jenny and Agatha were now inside the carriage compartment. Both were leaning against each other, deep in sleep. At that moment, the carriage resumed its slow progress forward. The coachman seemed to have awakened, but was unaware that he had been asleep. Shortly after, both women's long eyelashes trembled slightly, and their eyeballs moved rapidly under their eyelids. Soon both woke up almost simultaneously. "Lord Rhaenys, did we just fall asleep?" "Yes." Rhaenys nodded, and at the same time he softly touched the sorcery scroll in his jacket. Fortunately, the sorcery scroll was still there, indicating that what he had just experienced was not a dream. Rhaenys thought to himself, "This is too strange. I clearly had a good sleep last night." Jenny was a bit baffled. "To have fallen asleep in front of Lord Rhaenys, I am truly embarrassed." Agatha also looked puzzled. Rhaenys smiled slightly and said, "Perhaps the coachman's skill is too good and the carriage too smooth, which made you both fall asleep." Although he said this, Rhaenys was internally astonished by the magical nature of the dream-controlling witchcraft cast by the black-haired elf, which seemed to effortlessly control the dreams of different individuals within the reach of his sorcery. After a while, the road became busier with pedestrians and carriages. The familiar black-gray tall city walls also appeared in Rhaenys' view. They had arrived at County Town. This was Rhaenys' second visit to County Town. Just like the last time, after entering the city, the carriage continued to drive for about half an hour, eventually stopping at the gate of a luxurious mansion with a garden. As the carriage slowly stopped, Agatha smiled faintly and said, "We've arrived, Lord Rhaenys, this is my home." Just when Rain entered the library of the Wiggins family. Flashgold Town. Anna in her room propped her delicate cheek with her right hand, while her left hand aimlessly flipped through the trial book, made of silver. She gazed out at the bleak winter scenery, her thoughts adrift. 2 days before, she had successfully completed the 8 will runes of the basic etheric meditation technique on her first try, officially stepping into the level 1 wizard apprentice rank. Originally, she had planned to share this good news with Rain, but ever since Rain had become a formal knight, he had been far too busy. She found it very difficult now to find an appropriate time to be alone with Rain. When Lagray and Rain had gone off together to the Nightingale Forest, a deep envy had welled up in Anna's heart. She too wished to possess enough strength to join Rain in solving those difficult and mysterious matters. Besides, Lagray's sudden departure today made Anna feel that there seemed to be some little secret between Lagray and Rain. As Anna was lost in thought, suddenly the door to her room creaked open. In ran a cute squirrel. Startled by the sound of the door, Anna quickly turned around, only to find the little cutie who had scurried into Rain's room in search of food that morning, and a warm, friendly smile spread across her lovely face as she said, "Come here, little squirrel, come to me." But no sooner had Anna spoken than in the next second, her beautiful eyes widened in astonishment, and her little mouth opened into a perfect circle, as if she couldn't believe what was unfolding before her, because she saw that the adorable little squirrel had in an instant transformed into a tall female figure wearing a hooded cloak. What astonished her even more was that when the figure lifted the hood, she revealed a head of jet black hair, a face of surpassing beauty, and a pair of pointed ears. For a moment, time seemed to stop right then. The scene before her eyes delivered a profound shock to Anna. But unexpectedly, at the bottom of Anna's heart, there sprouted an involuntary sense of kinship, as if the strange elf lady before her had some innate, intangible connection with her. "Child, come, let me look at you," said the elf lady with the black hair, her voice soothing. Before Anna could react, the black-haired elf walked forward and waved her hand, causing a pale green glow of witchcraft to suddenly appear around Anna. The elf murmured, "Just as I suspected, Darin's handiwork, a fixed disguise spell." The next second the elf began chanting a spell. Soon after, a bright green light enveloped Anna. Immediately, Anna felt as if a tightness around her whole body had been relieved. It was an indescribable sensation. It felt as though she had always been living life shrouded in a cape, but now that mysterious cape had suddenly been removed. "Child, you should call me Auntie. I am your mother Delana Eaglemoon's sister. My name is Delana Eaglemoon," said the elf. I, Anna stammered at a loss. At that moment she felt as if her mind was about to explode. My goodness, an unfamiliar female elf suddenly appears in my room claiming to be my relative, and I am human. My mother is human too, and her name isn't Delana. This elf lady must have mistaken me for someone else. Yet her aura felt so familiar, and what had just happened to me? In an instant, Anna was utterly confused. After a while, Anna managed to compose herself and carefully chose her words before speaking. Excuse me, beautiful elf lady, might you have mistaken me for someone else? I am human, and my mother's name isn't Darin." "Child, touch your own ears," the black-haired elf said with a gaze full of tenderness and indulgence, gently touching the top of Anna's head. Anna could feel the genuine kindness emanating from the elf woman, and there was a special kind of warmth in being caressed by her. But why would she have me touch my ears? I couldn't have ears as pointy as hers. Because she looked at herself in the copper mirror every morning when she groomed, Anna was certain that wasn't the case. But when Anna touched what she knew to be her overly familiar ears, her eyes suddenly widened in disbelief. How is this possible? Rushing to the copper mirror, when Anna saw the familiar yet alien reflection staring back at her, she murmured to herself, "So, I am half-elf." As a half-elf, Anna's ears weren't as sharply pointed as a pureblood elf's, but rather had a slight curve to them. All things considered, without the disguise spell, Anna was even prettier than before, and there was an exotic charm to her. I wonder if rain will still, she said quietly to herself. After the elf named Delana Eaglemoon recounted the story of Anna's mother, her own sister, Anna finally believed that this elf lady before her could very well be her blood relative. And for the first time, Anna clearly understood her own mother's story. It turned out that when her mother, Delana Eaglemoon, was young, she had been deceived by a human wandering bard and had fallen in love before being persuaded and emboldened to steal some documents from the Druid Circle, including the trial book, the Silver Book. In fact, the wandering bard was a third-level wizard apprentice who specialized in human transformation and had long coveted certain special methods of animal and plant transformation within the Druid Circle. However, the other party mistook the trial book for a blank diary. Therefore, when Rain got it, he discovered that it contained many negative energies and natural witchcraft-related methods of animal and plant transformation. After obtaining this information, the wizard apprentice sold Darian Yuling to an imperial noble of the Dragon Empire, but later it was heard that Darian had escaped. However, when people from the Druid Circle went to track her down, they were unable to find her. It was not until Anna last triggered the amulet that Delana sensed something, because it was crafted by her own hands and given to her sister Darian as a gift. If Rain heard this segment, he would undoubtedly curse out loud, "Bastard." Not only did he deceive for lust, but he also made his own woman steal from her family. But the worst part was, after using her, he even sold his own woman. Such scum to the extreme. "Aunt Delana, where's my mother now?" Anna couldn't help but ask nervously. "I don't know, however. The one capable of hiding Darian and blocking our search must be a high noble of the Dragon Empire. Because I've heard that these high nobles, as the upper echelons of the empire, many of them fancy exotic beauties, especially elf beauties. From this angle, I think Darian should currently be safe." Anna, after hearing this, nodded. However, when she learned that her mother was likely still alive and not in danger, she couldn't help but feel somewhat relieved. No wonder, there was a time when she and her mother lived a life of constant upheaval. Her mother must have been evading the pursuit of some high noble. But in the end, it seems she couldn't escape. At this moment, Delana said, "So, child, it's dangerous for you to be alone in the Empire. Come back with me to the Druid Circle now." "Ah, this..." Anna hesitated for a moment. Delana continued, "As a half-elf, you need the power to protect yourself even more. Child, you are at the age where your strength can grow the fastest. We need to hurry back to the Druid Circle and make up for the time you've lost. Do you understand?" After thinking it over, Anna nodded. Indeed, she had always been in need of protection. If she could possess enough power, how wonderful that would be. "Aunt Delana, I'll go with you to the Druid Circle, but..." Anna looked at the trial book in Delana's hands, which had now returned to its rightful owner, her eyes shimmering slightly. She knew Rain was very interested in some of its contents. After stammering for a bit, Anna asked, "Aunt Delana, may I copy down the contents on the trial book about beast taming and animal and plant transformation?" You intend to give it to that young man named Rain." Delana quickly grasped Anna's intention and suddenly looked at her newly found niece with a complex expression on her face. "Yes." Anna nodded emphatically. "All right then." Delana thought, "Innocent niece, do you have any idea the young man you like?" In a flash, Delana's mind conjured up the images she saw in Rain's room the night before, which were capable of making one's cheeks flush and heart race. "Aunt Delana, why are you looking at me with such a strange look?" Anna keenly noticed that when she mentioned wanting to leave it for Rain, Aunt Delana's look suddenly became very complicated. How to say it? It seemed to contain sympathy, pity, and many other emotions. "Anna, do you like Rain?" Delana asked very directly this time. "Ah, no, not at all. It's just that Rain saved me." Anna blushed, lowered her head, and told Delana the whole story of how Rain saved her from the two wanted criminals. "So that's how it is." Delana softened her gaze when she heard Rain had saved Anna. A hero saving the princess from villains, such a familiar and beautiful scenario. No wonder Anna's heart was moved. Furthermore, Delana immediately thought of the blood flesh sproutling in the broken temple, which died to fire witchcraft, although the fog was too dense for her to see clearly how Rain had killed the blood flesh sproutling. But now, thinking it through, this young knight might not be so simple. His killing of the blood flesh sproutling was likely not dependent on a fire witchcraft scroll, but on his own understanding of witchcraft. A knight and a wizard apprentice both, an impressive young man indeed. "All right, Anna, the knowledge recorded here has already been modified by that despicable wizard apprentice. so copying it down wouldn't be breaking the rules of the Druid Circle. Besides this, I will also leave a piece of fire witchcraft incandescent light, which I accidentally acquired for your good friend Rain as a token of thanks for saving you. Saying so, Delana performed imprinting magic to transfer the contents recorded in the trial book onto a stack of paper. Meanwhile, she took out a leather scroll and handed it to Anna. Anna, after taking them excitedly, said, "Ah, that's great. Thank you, Aunt Delana. I'll write a letter to Rain. Please wait for a moment." Anna hastily picked up the quill and wrote, "Rain, by the time you read this letter, Aunt Delana and I will have already set out back to the Druid Circle in Ferdinand Forest. I will work hard to improve my abilities, hoping that I can be of assistance to you the next time we meet. Also, let me tell you a small secret. I can now visualize 8 will runes at once, Anna." Anna carefully placed the letter, the beast-taming content on the imprinted paper, and the hide scroll that contained the record of fire-based witchcraft, neatly on the bedside table in Rain's room. Then, with a lingering glance around Rain's room, she turned to Delana and said, "Aunt Delana, shall we go then?" "Yes, good," Delana nodded. However, just as Delana was preparing to take Anna away, she abruptly sensed someone lurking near their dwelling. Wait! Delana signaled Anna to stay in the room, and the next second she transformed back into a squirrel, zipping from the room to the rooftop. Following that, an eagle took flight from the roof. Before long, Anna heard the sounds of fighting from not far to the southwest, but it quickly returned to quiet, as if the battle was over in a short while. In the alleyway to the southwest corner, the black-haired elf Delana, looking at the black flames surrounding her, said in a low voice, "This is Black Flame. Could it be a follower of that deity?" While these black flames could not harm her in the slightest, only serving to hinder her movement, she had already discerned their origin. It seems Lord Windwalker's warning was correct. The sleeping gods are showing signs of awakening. Delana appeared to realize something, and for a moment her face showed concern. A short while later, when Delana returned to Anna's room, her expression was serene. "Aunt Delana, what just happened?" Anna asked anxiously. At that moment, a number of peace officers were hurrying toward that area on the street. "Nothing, it's been taken care of." "Anna, we need to leave." Delana shook her head without elaborating. "Oh, all right." In the woods to the north of Flashgold Town, a lithe knight bearing a scythe-shaped weapon was running swiftly, his hand pressing against his continuously bleeding abdomen, cursing under his breath as he ran. How could a druid suddenly appear near the Rain residence? This man was the leader of the Wilderness Brotherhood, known as Knight of the Wild Giovanni, Meister County City, inside the Wiggins family library. Unaware of what had happened at his home, Rain was diligently searching through ancient books in the library. Unlike the Crowley family, although the Wiggins family's library was somewhat larger, the books were not sorted separately according to whether they were written in Lingwen, hence Rain had to search shelf by shelf. Flipping through one book after another, Rain found himself shaking his head most of the time. After a while, Rain suddenly stopped because he came across a travelogue written in Lingwen that contained a section on the Mother Tree cult. The travelogue outlined the core tenet of the Mother Tree cult. At the beginning of the world, a mother tree from the distant void descended upon the world, scattering seeds that became the origin of life. However, according to the sayings of the ancient sages, the so-called Mother Tree was actually a powerful entity from an alien void, beguiling sentient beings into worship and sacrifice. Of course, all the sacrificial practices of the Mother Tree cult's followers could receive rewards and gifts from the Mother Tree to varying degrees. Several hours later, after having gone through all the ancient books written in Lingwen, Akkadian, in the library, Rain found that the only useful one was the travelogue he had just read. The rest were either ancient sacrificial ceremonies long vanished in the river of history, or eulogies from some bygone personage, leaving Rain somewhat disappointed inside. Although this result was within his expectations, but facing the actual result, Rain couldn't help feeling an inevitable disappointment. Perhaps I should take a different approach to my search for witchcraft. Rain realized that his current method of searching for witchcraft was like a person looking for something in a primeval forest obscured by tall trees. Since he could not see clearly all around, it was difficult to determine where the object was, so he could only try his luck everywhere. This clearly wasn't a good method. A more effective way would be to first climb to a high place, like a watchtower, then look from afar and locate where the desired object is, or at least determine the direction. Then, when searching for it, it would be with a clear goal in sight. Currently, my level within the Empire seems similar to a watchtower, Rain thought. Once I pass this ennoblement examination and become a formal noble, I should come to know many more secrets. Perhaps the direction to proceed with witchcraft or even the path of a wizard will gradually become clear. Just like Adams's inheritance, which actually came from a wizard faction known as the Een School. But how to connect with such a school of wizards is what Rain needs to consider now. However, as long as Rain continues to rise within the Empire's power hierarchy, he will inevitably come across related information at some point in time. And if Rain wants to ascend quickly within the Imperial power structure, the invitation from the sword-bearer mentioned last time by Hamilton and Colonel Kanar of the Imperial military might serve as a stepping stone to a fast-track promotion. Rain continued to ponder, because a comment from Colonel Connor had made a deep impression on him. The Sword Bearers is a privileged organization that spans across the entire Empire. If you could join, you would break out of the bounds of Meister County, even out of Minster Province. You will come into contact with a far broader world. Would he come into contact with a far broader world? Rain murmured to himself. In that case, the minimum criteria for my baronial evaluation must be to achieve the highest evaluation, that of a baron. It seems I need to prepare well. After all, even if he achieved the baron evaluation, it didn't guarantee that he would receive an invitation from the Empire's sword bearers. Only the sufficiently outstanding can stand out. With this thought, Rain's eyes gradually brightened. That moment, the laughter of Jenny and Agatha, like silver bells, came from the doorway of the library. They had just seen Rain so absorbed and had quietly left the library without accompanying him the whole time. Rain checked the time. It was exactly noon. It seemed the two ladies had likely come to invite him to join them for lunch. In the afternoon, after finishing with the Wigging family's visit, Rain declined Jenny's invitation to visit the Crowley family, and after exchanging at the county town military supplies store for a new set of chrome iron armor and otter leather armor, took a carriage back to Flashgold town. The otter leather armor was something Hamilton had reminded him to prepare, as the Baron evaluation was to take place in Rossby City, which is close to the sea. However, upon arriving at Flashgold town, Rain did not go home directly but first stopped by Hamilton's office. Since Rain planned to leave for Rossby City in a few days, he first came to greet Hamilton. "Oh, Rain, what brings you here?" "Right, there's something I forgot to tell you. Since you solved that mysterious event at Agatha Mill last time, several nobles have contacted me, wishing to convey through me their hope that you might help solve some mysterious events on their estates. However, considering that you are about to participate in the baronial evaluation, I thought these matters could be deferred. After all, if any accident happens and affects your performance during the evaluation, that would be too great a loss. So, I've already declined them on your behalf." "Thank you, sir," Rain nodded. He himself had the same intention. He needed to make some preparations before departing, and it indeed wasn't a suitable time to deal with these mysterious events. Furthermore, after the recent event with the Mother Tree sect in Nightingale Forest, Rain felt that the level of danger of mysterious events varied greatly and was much higher than he had initially estimated, especially because of the special nature of the mysterious events. Their investigation reports were often inaccurate. "Rain, did you come here to tell me that you are planning to depart in a few days?" Hamilton asked proactively. "Yes, sir, I plan to leave 10 days from now." 10 days from now? Hamilton pondered and then advised, "Rain, I suggest you might leave a few days earlier. After all, arriving earlier will give you ample time to familiarize yourself with the surrounding environment." "You are very thoughtful, sir. Then I will leave 7 days from now," Rain calculated and said. When Rain returned home, he suddenly found the house much quieter, and his mother Emma looked at him with a reproachful gaze. As Rain was baffled, his younger sister Beau, he rushed into his arms, looking upset, and said, "Brother, Sister Anna has left too." What?" Rain's heart skipped a beat and he immediately asked back. "Sister Anna has left, it seems. She left you a letter, it's on your bedside," his sister Beau, he said with her eyes wide open. When Rain climbed to the second floor again, he noticed that 3 bedrooms was suddenly emptied of 2, which couldn't help but make him sigh. If Laguerre's departure was something Rain had anticipated early on, after all, she had mentioned it from the start. Then Anna's departure was unexpected. He had thought she would stay here for quite a long time, but sometimes farewells come so suddenly. Moreover, he was also curious about why Anna decided to leave all of a sudden. because from what he knew of Anna, this did not seem like her decision, or at least it should not have been so hasty. Opening the door, Rain entered his own bedroom and immediately saw 3 neatly stacked items on the nightstand: a letter, a stack of papers, and a roll of beast skin. Without any hesitation, he picked up the letter and began to read it. "Oh, Aunt, Druid Circle." Rain immediately associated this with the beautiful elf lady who wanted to trade with him for the Dark Mother Tree seeds, and it was very likely that the black-haired elf was Anna's aunt. Otherwise, the probability of 2 druids appearing in Flashgold Town within a short period of time was indeed too low, far too low. I really hadn't expected that she would be Anna's aunt. Wait, if that's the case, doesn't that mean Anna is also an elf, but Anna's appearance? In an instant, Rain thought of a key point, but after pondering and stroking his chin for a while, he still couldn't understand the reason behind it. Also, is the Druid Circle in Ferdinand Forest? Rain thought about it and realized he had never heard of this Ferdinand Forest before. It must be quite far from Meister County. Hoping to help me next time we meet. Reading this, Rain felt that he somewhat understood the reason why Anna had decided to go to the Druid Circle. He had seen Anna's determination when she was diligently studying basic meditation, as well as her perseverance while trying to heal Lagoret. So Rain knew that despite Anna's seemingly soft and shy exterior, she was actually very determined on the inside, a girl with a lot of willpower and conviction. However, when Rain read the last part of the letter, "I'll tell you a little secret." I can now visualize 8 will runes at the same time. He couldn't help but imagine Anna's expression while writing those words. Her beautiful face must have had a shy and joyous smile. Thinking of this, a smile also couldn't help but appear on Rain's face, and he silently thought, "Then I'll look forward to your robust growth, but Anna, I'll tell you a little secret too. Actually, I can already visualize 20 will runes at once. So, the next time we meet, the likelihood is, I'll still be protecting you." It took a while for Rain to calm down from his slightly melancholic mood. It felt like the end of the college entrance exams in his previous life, when good friends went their separate ways. Even though they had agreed to meet again someday, it was likely that when that day truly arrived, quite a long time would have passed. Folding the letter carefully, he put it back in the envelope. Then Rain picked up the stack of papers, and upon looking at them, he immediately recognized them. "Oh, isn't this content?" Immediately, Rain realized that the Beast Taming Journal, also known as the Silver Book, must have been taken by Anna's aunt, the black-haired elf. But as the items were returned to their rightful owner, Rain didn't feel any loss. The last item, the beastskin scroll, made Rain's brows rise and his face light up with joy when he opened it. It was a new spell of witchcraft, and fire magic at that, which he had been wanting to find. "I never thought that I would have almost no gain in the Wigging family's library, but coming back home, I actually obtained a fire spell." Thinking about it, Rain wasn't sure if it was a gift from Anna or a sign of gratitude from the black-haired elf for taking care of Anna, but that wasn't important. What mattered was that if it weren't for Anna, he wouldn't have this achievement. So, the gratitude he felt for this gift, he placed upon Anna. Right away, Rain began to carefully examine the beastskin scroll. Scorching Light. Rain softly read the name of the new spell. Burning Beam of Light. After looking it over several times, Rain found that the difficulty of visualizing the witchcraft model for this new Scorching Light spell was about the same as High Temperature Force Field, both being of about the same level of difficulty. Since Rain had already mastered 2 fire spells, Scorching Touch and High Temperature Force Field, and his spiritual power had also increased to 23 points. So, learning this new fire spell was not as difficult as the last time. Heading to the storeroom. About half an hour later, after failing 7 or 8 times, Rain finally succeeded, only to see a flame, about 20 to 30 centimeters high and constantly burning fiercely, suddenly appear above Rain's right palm, instantly illuminating the whole room. The overall shape of the flame was not very large, like an enlarged flame, but it seemed to have high heat, continuously transforming into light energy, giving an extraordinarily dazzling effect. Although Rain had anticipated it, after just squinting at it for a second or two, his eyes began to see white, and he instinctively started to tear up and blink. Of course, tearing up and blinking are part of the eye's natural protective mechanism, and there's nothing bad about it. But shedding tears and blinking could be fatal in battle, especially against an equally matched opponent, because it's very likely that a single blink could cause one to miss taking the initiative, and if one instinctively covered their eyes amid such bright light, they might well be delivered into the embrace of the goddess. At the same time, Rain also felt a slight stinging sensation in his retina. He knew if he continued to stare at this incredibly bright flame, it wouldn't take long before his retina suffered damage. With a gentle wave of his right hand, Rain cancelled the new witchcraft and crossed his arms in thought. This new witchcraft's effect was similar to a flash grenade from his previous life. At the same time, Rain vaguely had some ideas about the applications of this witchcraft. However, to cast it in battle and combine it with his existing combat rhythm, there were a few minor issues with the witchcraft that needed to be resolved. Right then, a system prompt followed. You have studied the Scorching Light, and your understanding has improved. You have comprehended a new skill, Scorching Light. Your skill Scorching Light has leveled up. Experience +1 simultaneously. Under the Wizard Apprentice Transcendent panel, next to the icon for the high temperature field, a brand new icon appeared. The icon's border briefly lit up, and the image depicted a raging flame, surrounded by short lines representing the rays of light. It was like a child's drawing of the sun, with a circle of short lines around the blazing sun, clearly meant to signify the continuous emission of light. Rain focused his attention on the new icon, noting a line of small text underneath it. Scorching Light LV1, 1/100, Scorching Light LV1 effect. Consumes a certain amount of spiritual power to trigger fire energy particles using a specific witchcraft model, forming a scorching flame above the caster's palm. The flame will continue to emit strong light for about 10 seconds. Note: casting time is 3 seconds. Power is proportional to the caster's spiritual power. One of the small issues that needed solving was the casting time. 3 seconds was clearly too long. Finding a precious 3-second window in battle was too difficult. It would be much better if it could be reduced to 1 second, because in 1 second, such opportunities weren't uncommon in battle. For instance, during a weapons clash, if both fighters were repelled simultaneously, then seizing the chance to cast Scorching Light unexpectedly would likely cause temporary blindness in the enemy. Even if the opponent wasn't blinded, it could still create a good initial advantage or a degree of superiority. However, to achieve this effect, one naturally had to level up Scorching Light. Because according to experience with the witchcraft Scorching Touch, if Scorching Light could be increased to LV2, the casting time could likely be reduced by about 20%, from 3 seconds to 2.4 seconds. Rain pondered as he quickly did mental calculations, but 2.4 seconds was still too long. If it reached LV3, then it would go from 2.4 seconds to 1.9 seconds. Rain's eyebrows lifted. This casting time would likely surprise an opponent, as it now began with a 1. Of course, it would still be better if it could be reduced further, to a shorter time. If it reached LV4, it would go from 1.9 seconds to 1.5 seconds. 1.5 second casting time. Rain nodded to himself, showing a satisfied expression. With merely half the original casting time of 3 seconds, its practicality in real combat was much higher. I currently have 5 remaining skill points. If I consecutively allocate 3 skill points to the witchcraft Scorching Light, I can reach this target, Rain thought to himself. And even if all 5 remaining skill points were invested in this new witchcraft, Tusk, a 1 second casting time. Rain stroked his chin, somewhat astounded. However, after some thought, Rain slightly shook his head. That can wait for now. After all, 3 skill points is not a small amount. Whether added to the Giant Bear Sword technique or the Tokkul Hammer technique, either would bring significant improvements, Rain mused. The second small issue to resolve was the applicable scenario. Certainly, during overcast, drizzly weather conditions, the blinding effect of Scorching Light would presumably be quite good. Of course, for the best effect, it naturally would be to use it at night. It was estimated that it would instantly blind an unprepared enemy for several seconds, thus securing the victory. However, during bright, sunny weather, particularly when the sunlight was harsh, the effect of the new witchcraft Scorching Light would be greatly diminished. Rain paced back and forth in his room, summarizing the new witchcraft's applicable scenarios. Also, the new witchcraft would likely be extremely effective in dark, damp environments like mines, especially against those accustomed to dim and moist conditions with faint light. Presumably a single cast of Scorching Light could directly blind their eyes, he considered. Thinking this, a bright light flashed in Rain's eyes. Furthermore, if I wanted to cause strong blinding effects even on a sunny day, it wouldn't be impossible. As my spiritual power increases, the power of scorching light will inevitably also increase. Once it crosses a certain brightness threshold, it should achieve an effect that could dazzle enemies even during daylight, he calculated. The last minor issue to solve was a matter of habit, because casting the witchcraft blazing light requires one hand to be free, and the techniques Rain currently practices, whether it's giant bear sword technique or Tokuka hammer technique, both involve two-handed weapons. So, in daily practice, I must consciously strengthen this aspect of training so that in battle, I can naturally and smoothly seize the opportunity to cast the witchcraft blazing light. Immediately, Rain began to ponder which moves could be followed by blazing light. After the secret move Rising Dragon Hammer, there is a good chance to follow up with the new witchcraft blazing light. After the secret move Roaring Strike, if the enemy can still withstand it, I can also follow up with the new witchcraft blazing light. Half an hour later, Rain's face revealed a look of joy. He had considered all his commonly used swordsmanship and hammer skills in conjunction with the new witchcraft and found that there were quite a few points of compatibility. What remained was the need for daily practice, accumulating over time. At that moment, Rain suddenly remembered that he had intended to test the effects of witchcraft high-temperature force field, after his spiritual power had increased by 3 points. But the plan had been interrupted by the arrival of the Crowley family's carriage. Now was the perfect time to test it. So Rain placed 3 basins of water on the table, as before, situated 1 meter, 2 meters and 3 meters away from him. After 10 seconds, Rain voluntarily stopped the witchcraft high-temperature force field. Because Rain had discovered that within the field, the temperature rose quickly, much like the combined effect of a microwave oven and an air fryer, capable of heating the air to the desired temperature within a few seconds. Although heating water took longer, the duration in the field didn't show much difference. Compared to the last time, what pleased him was that the basin of water 2 meters away now faintly emitted white steam, indicating that the temperature had reached around 90 degrees Celsius. It wasn't far from boiling. The power had clearly increased slightly from last time. The water in the basins at 1 meter and 3 meters also warmed significantly, going from roughly 40 to 50 degrees to a scalding 60 to 70 degrees. Clearly, if an enemy were to fight within this high-temperature force field, they would be at a considerable disadvantage since the temperature exceeded even the scorching surface temperature of the Sahara Desert. Every second would be an agony for the enemy, especially if the enemy were also clad in metal armor. In an instant, Rain's mind conjured the image of those large, multi-layered, shiny stainless steel steamers from breakfast joints in his previous life, filled neatly with big meat buns and steam billowing from the top. Thinking of this, Rain couldn't help but reveal a bright smile on his face. In the following days, Rain scarcely left the house. Apart from occasionally training the Greyhound Cookie, Rain spent most of his time practicing the integration of witchcraft, swordsmanship, and hammer skill. During this period, apart from sharing a small portion of the fierce bear meat with Cookie, Rain consumed the remaining tens of pounds of fierce bear meat completely. Additionally, with regard to the means of transportation for his journey, Rain considered whether to ask the Crowley family to prepare a carriage bearing the noble crest, which could save him some trouble at checkpoints along the way. But upon reflection, he thought it best to keep a low profile for his upcoming ennoblement assessment. After all, his conflict with the cult of the Black Flame had become irreconcilable, and it would not be wise to let them know his destination. Besides, there was also the friction with Baron Alonso, though it seemed the Baron hadn't made any moves recently. Rain recalled the route from Flashgold Town to Rossby City. According to the information he had seen, there were roughly 3 routes from Flashgold Town to Rossby City. The reason for roughly was that as one reached a town, the closer to Rossby City, the more options for various side paths became available. If he chose some minor roads during his journey to conceal his movements, a carriage might not be appropriate since some of the paths were rugged. While traveling by horse would not only be more flexible, but also more suitable. Thus, that afternoon, under the warm winter sun, Rain headed to the John stable on the southern side of Flashgold Town. This visit was unlike the last when he came to learn riding. This time, Rain wanted to purchase 2 strong warhorses. Soon, Rain met with the sanguine-nosed middle-aged man stable master John Moyle. For John Moyle, Rain was certainly a memorable figure. "Lord Riani, what brings you here today?" John greeted him with utmost courtesy. It seemed that John was aware of Rain's appointment as the deputy marshal of Flashgold Town. "Mr. John, today I'm planning to purchase 2 strong horses, so I need your help choosing them," Rain said with a smile. An hour later, Rain rode back home on a black horse while leading a brown one. The reason for purchasing 2 horses was that a single steed could not fully bear the weight of a fully armed Rain along with his luggage. One would be for riding, while the other would carry his baggage. In addition, Rain intended to conduct a small comparative experiment. Experimental content. Study on the changes in muscle strength and endurance of horses after taking a mutated growth potion. Test subjects, 2 equally strong black and brown horses. Experimental process recorded the differences over 7 days between the black horse, whose feed was supplemented with the mutated growth potion, and the brown horse, which was not. The day before departure, Rain obtained the experimental conclusions. Experimental conclusion. After 7 days, no prominent mutations were observed in the black horse, but it is estimated that the black horse's muscle strength and endurance have increased by about 20%. Clearly, the mutated growth potion could not only be used on dogs, but could also strengthen animals to a certain extent. That afternoon, someone Rain knew well but had not expected at all visited his home. Shadia, the chief maid from the Habsburg estate. The usually stern chief maid rarely showed a smile and said, "Rain, in accordance with the lady's request, here is a letter for you to pass on." Is it a letter from Lady Clea sent from the imperial city? Rain took the letter while asking. At the same time, he had a guess in his heart. "Exactly. The lady found out that you've stepped into transcendent knighthood and was very surprised." Shadia nodded and said, "As expected. Clea knows that I have entered into transcendence," Rain thought to himself. The seal on the envelope was intact. Obviously no one had opened it before Rain. In front of Shadia, Rain quickly opened the letter. Inside there were 2 sheets of paper. The first sheet of paper read, "Rain, you can't imagine my astonished expression when I found out that you had become transcendent. Please allow me to take back my previous words. Perhaps one day you will achieve greater things on the path of knighthood than I have, but good talent needs the guidance of a great teacher even more. I believe, now that you have stepped into transcendence, you can understand this point even better. Therefore, here is a letter of introduction to Master Gunther Odinga. If you're interested, within 3 months, you can go to the Golden Coast in Rosby County, where he lives in seclusion, to learn for a while. Trust me, Master Gunther is absolutely a master of exquisite swordsmanship. If you can gain something, it will definitely help you in the subsequent noble title conferral examination." At the end of the letter, there was the familiar signature, Clea. The second sheet of paper was the letter of introduction from Clea to Master Gunther Odinga for further study. "By the way, Rain, do you have anything you'd like me to pass on to the lady?" Shadia asked after seeing Rain finish reading the letter. After a moment of thought, Rain said, "Please tell Lady Clea that I thank her for her concern and support. I think I will find a suitable time to visit Master Gunther." Rain didn't plan to refuse Clea's proposal to introduce him to a reclusive master of swordsmanship for study, because his enlightenment on the path of knighthood came from Clea's guidance. Therefore, Rain always had a good impression of Clea. Moreover, from the content of this letter, Clea further expressed her goodwill toward him. Although at the beginning, Clea believed he only had the potential to be a follower. The next morning, just as dawn broke and after saying goodbye to his family, Rain rode the strong black horse that had been fed the enhanced diet for 7 days and set off for his destination, Rosby City. Soon, Rain's figure disappeared at the end of the road. 5 days later, with the winter's icy rain in a large forest hung with white icicles, there was a winding gray path extending far towards the seaside. 2 horses were riding slowly, one after the other, on the path. The stronger black horse in the lead carried a knight in full plate armor, a knight with a distinctive feature. A great sword and a 2-handed warhammer were carried on his back, a rare combination of dual weapons. It was substantially different from the typical knight's sword and shield or sword and bow combination. This knight was Rain. Fortunately, the knight's armor was lined with lamb's wool, providing excellent insulation, so even in the icy rain. With the environment cold and damp, Rain didn't feel uncomfortable. Why not use the fire-based witchcraft high-temperature field to dry off? Don't forget the warhorse under him, which couldn't withstand such high temperatures. Following him was a brown horse, carrying 3 or 4 parcels, mostly daily necessities and food. After riding continuously for 5 days, their destination, Rosby City, was now not far ahead. Rain estimated that in at most half a day he would arrive at his destination. Discover hidden stories at Empire. About half an hour later, even the strong black horse under Rain started to breathe heavily, and in the cold, icy rain, 2 columns of steam rose briskly in front of the horse's head. Rain knew he needed to find a place to let the horse rest for a while. Actually, it was his fault, as the weight of his 2 weapons alone exceeded that of a standard knight's armor and weapon load combined. Moreover, Rain also had to count his chromium steel suit, so it was normal for the strong black horse, which was still just an ordinary horse, to be struggling. Perhaps with continued feeding of the mutated growth potion, there might be a possibility for the black horse to undergo some kind of mutation. But for now, it seemed that more time was needed to see the outcome. After turning a corner on a small forest path, Rain's keen ears caught the crisp cracking sound of burning wood. Looking up, Rain peered through the thin icy rain and the dense mist, and saw someone had lit a campfire in the forest to their left. A young man with thick eyebrows, also clad in knight armor, had kindled a bonfire under a large tree. The tree's canopy was vast, its leaves broad and dense, offering excellent protection from the rain. Even the sporadic drops that fell were quickly sizzled away by the bonfire. However, Rain had no intention of approaching, not because he was afraid, but because he had no interest in dealing with strangers whose backgrounds were unknown to him. Thus, Rain decided to ride on for a while before finding a place where he could rest alone. Seemingly hearing the sound of hooves, the thick-eyebrowed knight looked up, saw Rain's solo rider with 2 horses' attire. His face brightened, and he stood up to greet him. "Hey, I'm a knight heading to Rossby City for the knighthood examination. Judging by your attire, you must be too, right?" The other's enthusiastic expression and frank introduction momentarily stunned Rain. Realizing Rain's hesitation, the man then took out a purple gold badge from his bosom that was nearly identical to the one in Rain's hand and showed it to him. At the same time, he said, "Look, this is the proof badge. If you're also going to Rossby City for the knighthood examination, you should be familiar with this item. Since we've met, it must be fate. Maybe we can help each other out during the exam, so don't be shy, come and take shelter from the rain." Rain glanced at the badge and knew it should be authentic. Since the other party was so enthusiastic, it seemed somewhat unkind to refuse further. After thinking it over, Rain guided his black horse to slowly ride over. "Hello, my name is Hass Klein from Rossby County." "Rain, Meister County." Rain nodded and said. After Rain dismounted, he somehow glanced slightly at the dense forests on either side. However, this action went unnoticed by the other party as Rain's face was covered by his knight's visor and the turn of his head was very subtle. It seems there are prying eyes. Not just one person. Interesting. Rain, did it take you several days to come from Meister County? The roads are rough in winter. Come, have a cup of hot barley wine to warm up. Hass was very enthusiastic, picking up the iron kettle heated by the fireside and handing it to Rain. "Thank you, you're too kind, but I don't feel cold," Rain said, raising his hand and declining the iron wine kettle offered by Hass. "With this freezing rain, how can you not be cold? Come on, Rain, don't be shy." Hass continued to warmly summon him, almost pushing the iron kettle into Rain's arms. This made Rain raise an eyebrow and say, "Lord, you've played your part well enough, though it has been a bit too much." This statement made Hass pause, his expression changing instantly. He stared blankly at Rain for a moment, as if realizing Rain was not joking, then quickly stepped back a few paces and said, How did you figure it out?" However, quickly realizing something, he clapped his hands sharply, clap, clap. Suddenly, the trees in the dense forest shook, and in a moment, about 15 people burst out, wielding various weapons, and several held crossbow arrows. From their aura, most seemed to be commoners, with a few possessing the strength of knights' attendants. The man leading them, wielding a chain mace, moved with steady strides and long breaths, likely possessing the strength of a formal knight. "Are you a bandit gang? You don't seem like it. Typically, bandit gangs wouldn't have 2 leaders of proper knightly rank." Rain spoke, focusing not on the people but on the young man known as Hass. "Sergei, why waste words on this guy? Just kill him." "Go," the burly leader gestured, and launched an attack on Rain. Indeed, Hass was a false name, and Sergei must be his real name. However, a chilling flash of sword light passed, and Rain suddenly held a dual-handed greatsword in his hands. Roar! The next second, a sound akin to a giant bear's roar burst in everyone's ears, instantly causing most people to clutch their heads. Their faces contorted in pain as they fell to the ground. including those bandits possessing the strength of knights' attendants. Only the burly man and Sergei managed to barely stand their ground, yet their eardrums bled, and they stood dazedly. Thud thud, two heavy thuds were heard. The burly man and the one called Sergei both had their legs severed above the knees by Rain. Now their upper bodies lay on the ground, blood spurting. "Ah," the two screamed in unison. "Now, perhaps you can tell me who directed you and the origin of this proof badge," Rain said, his demeanor calm. "Go to hell, you bastard, you're done for," the burly man retorted harshly. However, the next second he fell silent, his gaze turning to Rain in horror, because Rain had approached one of his subordinates and efficiently slit the man's throat, with an ease and nonchalance akin to slaughtering a chicken. The second one. The eighth one. Soon, around the bonfire lay a circle of dead bandits. Only the two men whose legs had been cut off and the leader named Sergei were left alive. The two seemed to have forgotten the pain of their severed limbs, exchanged a look, and realized that this time they had kicked an iron plate. They no longer needed Rain to prompt anything. They quickly spilled everything, pouring out the details like bamboo tubes spilling beans. Having heard them out, Rain frowned. Turns out, there was a mysterious force known as Zeral's Rebellion secretly backing them to carry out tasks that weaken the Empire's strength, and their current mission was to assassinate young knights attending the knighthood examination. Of course, if they could capture him alive, that would be even better. If successful, they would not only gain valuable armor and weapons, but also be able to collect a substantial bounty with the purple gold badge. Moreover, there indeed was a young knight named Hass, who had been drugged and was currently being held captive in the dense forest. Enjoy new stories from Empire. Rain swung his sword twice, promptly killing the two men. After some thought, he ventured into the dense forest, and soon discovered a tall young man clad in a thin linen shirt, bound by heavy iron shackles on his hands and feet, and with a dirty cloth stuffed in his mouth, behind a large tree. When he saw Rain, clad in knight armor, the bound man couldn't help but struggle and grunt. Clang, clang, sparks flew everywhere. Rain flourished his sword twice, instantly splitting the thick iron shackles. The tall young man immediately freed himself, swiftly pulled the dirty cloth from his mouth and spat twice, saying, "Thank you for saving me. My name is Hass from Rossbyshire. Rain from Meistershire. Those deceitful, despicable creatures who drugged me, were they all killed by Lord Rain?" Hass asked angrily. Rain nodded. "That's really great. Those despicable villains, they deserve to die." Hearing that Rain had killed them, Hass burst into laughter. Hass stripped the breastplate that originally belonged to him off a robust man and began to converse with Rain around the campfire. Half an hour later, the now acquainted pair chatted while riding their horses together, heading toward Rossby City. Although Rain did not fear the cold, it was obviously not a good idea to camp outside in the wintry rainy night. The two arrived at the gate of Rossby City by dusk, and after showing the purple gold badges, they were quickly escorted by a staff member to their destination for this trip, the Naval Home Inn. At this moment, it was the time when the red sunset was descending. A gentle breeze caressed his face, and Rain immediately smelled a faint scent of the sea. He looked up only to see, dozens of meters ahead, the vast and azure sea, with many white seabirds flying in the clear sky, including seagulls and albatrosses. Along the coastline were densely packed white sails, each representing a boat. Although these vessels varied greatly in size, they seemed to be civilian fishing and transport ships. However, a few hundred meters away, there were clearly several large four-masted ships that appeared to be some type of warship. Rain pulled his gaze back and looked to his left, where there was a three-story building with a sign reading Naval Home Inn hanging above the door. Across the street from the inn stood a towering bronze statue with a five-masted sail, plus a very spacious gate attended by 4 guards in blue uniforms. Rain squinted his eyes and saw, written in gilded letters on the gate, Imperial South Sea Fleet, 6th Division Base. The Naval Home Inn. Well, indeed, just as the name implies, the naval base is right across the street. As the two entered the inn, a female attendant greeted them with a smile and asked, "Excuse me, are you the knights here to participate in the knighting assessment?" "Yes," Rain nodded. "Please follow me. I need you to register your information with Lady Marika," the attendant said as she led the way. The trio arrived at a room at the far end of the corridor on the first floor. The attendant knocked on the door and said, "Lady Marika, new knights have arrived. Come in." A crisp female voice came from inside the room. To their surprise, the room was occupied by a naval female officer with a graceful figure. Upon seeing Rain and Hass enter, she stood up and formally said, I am Marika Morales, responsible for the knighting assessment on behalf of the Imperial Navy. You can consult me about any related matters, but first, I need to verify your information. A female lieutenant colonel, that's rare. Haas murmured after glancing at Marika's shoulder rank. Rain noticed that her shoulder rank was a pair of golden leaves with a crescent moon. Rain Carlin, Meistershire, Flashgold Town, 15 years old. Rain took off his helmet, revealing a face even younger than Haas's. Rain, you're only 15? My God. Haas's eyes widened in astonishment. However, Marika was even more astonished, thinking that although it was uncommon to see a knight at 15, the way these two seemed so familiar with each other, didn't they know what each other looked like? Haas Klein, 18 years old. The impressive naval lieutenant colonel, Marika, after registering their information, instructed. During the knighting assessment period, your stay and meals at the Naval Home Inn are free. You are also free to train at the training grounds behind the inn at any time. Additionally, next door is the quartermaster's room where you can buy various weapons, armor, and first aid supplies. Of course, the prices might be a bit higher than the market, but the quality is reliable. Oh, do they have knight plate armor crafted from rare ores? Rain asked, raising an eyebrow. Of course not. Marika rolled her eyes at Rain. What a pity. Rain shrugged resignedly. Lieutenant Colonel Marika, about the knighting assessment task. Haas rubbed his hands together, inquiring about the related matters. I'm sorry. According to the joint directive of the Imperial Navy and the Knighthood Assessment Commission, in order to maintain confidentiality, the specific tasks of this assessment will be announced on the day of the task itself. Marika shook her head and replied. Wow, is this assessment that significant? Haas exclaimed in surprise. A task related to the Imperial Navy. No wonder they were staying at the Naval Home Inn and being attended by a naval officer. Rain listened, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. The second day, after checking into the Navy hotel, Rain didn't go to the training grounds, but chose to wander around the hotel and its vicinity instead. Soon, Rain gained a preliminary understanding of the environment here. Turns out, the islands surrounding Rossby City are riddled with pirate organizations and smuggling rings of various sizes, both large and small. Rain also overheard from naval officers chatting in the tavern on the first floor of the hotel that many Imperial wanted criminals who had fled from inland areas were also hiding on these islands. Furthermore, on some of the larger and more remote islands, there are indigenous tribes whose warriors paint their faces with camouflage and exhibit fierce combat prowess, with some of their leaders being as strong as formal knights. As for why the Empire hasn't been able to completely wipe out the ghouls and goblins on these islands, it seems that the newly formed Eagle Federation has restrained the majority of the Imperial Navy's forces. Of course, there are probably other reasons, but that's not something Rain, who had only arrived a day ago, would know. Such a complicated situation plunged Rain into contemplation for a moment. Clearly, his barren candidacy assessment task might involve attacking a pirate den, killing a wanted criminal, or even capturing a spy from the Eagle Federation, among other possibilities. If he could know the content of the task in advance, he'd certainly be able to prepare more effectively. However, upon further thought, Rain considered that with his peak knight strength, he was clearly one of the top contenders among all those participating in the candidacy assessment. If he was going to have a hard time, then the others would undoubtedly have an even tougher challenge. On the night he checked into the Navy hotel, Rain noticed that aside from a small number of guests in naval uniform, the majority in the neighboring rooms were young people. These youngsters moved with steady steps and exhibited deep and long breaths. Clearly, they should all be knights participating in the candidacy assessment, like Haas and himself. Rain vaguely estimated their number and found several dozen. Moreover, with Rain's peak knight strength and perceptive senses sharpened to a fine point of 23, although he could not accurately judge everyone's strength, he could vaguely gauge their caliber. Most of these young people, including Haas, had the strength of formal knights, though perhaps Rain might mistake a veteran knight for a regular one due to some disparity in strength. But those he found somewhat inscrutable were only 3 or 4 individuals with gold or silver lines on their cuffs and collars, who were most likely noble heirs. No way around it. When talents are equal, noble heirs receive better upbringing and training from a young age, coupled with hereditary bloodlines and family-based knight breathing methods, naturally making them stronger. Moreover, young people continued to arrive at the Navy Hotel today, holding bulging travel bags and arriving even later than he did. The latter's arrival timing was surprisingly even later than his. In the afternoon of the same day, Rain went to the training grounds behind the hotel for the first time and discovered many young people practicing with various weapons, mostly swords and shields, hammers and shields, and bows and arrows, with a number working with dual-handed greatswords. But there were far fewer practicing with two-handed warhammers. A number of them were gathered in small groups, and when Hass saw Rain, he couldn't help but be delighted, coming forward and saying, "Rain, you finally come. Look, those are the noble heirs vying for the Baron title. They should be the strongest among us candidates here." Hass added. Rain followed Hass's gaze and saw 3 or 4 groups, each with one person at the center surrounded by others, either demonstrating martial techniques or discussing something. Upon observation,